Yo, what up? Meow meow. Um, I guess tomorrow. When I say tomorrow, I mean 12 hours from now. I'd still be awake. I think I'm gonna send a message following up. Meow 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 meow. Man, I really wanna push through with a work from home job. But we'll see. There you go. So we watched this. We watched this in our previous stream. I can fix her.
Imagine redness calmed in seconds. Skin 1004 centellipads. Fast calming and hydration. Lazada 100% authenticity guaranteed.
I didn't even do an intro. I was supposed to play this.
Seven levels of psychopaths. Explained.
Level 1. The inaccurate.
These characters are here not because they aren't dangerous or entertaining or badly written, but because they're fundamentally wrong about what psychopathy actually is. Norman Bates in Psycho and Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs are both entertaining and frightening while being extremely well written. But using the paper published by Dr. Samuel Leistet, we can confirm that these beloved characters are in fact inaccurate portrayals of psychopathy. Leistet and his team said that these characters don't quite fit the mold because in the case of Norman Bates, he is more psychotic rather than psychopathic. Big distinction between the two. As for Hannibal Lecter, he is obscenely unrealistic and a caricature of a psychopath. This is because Hannibal accumulates many personal characteristics that are not generally found in everyday clinical practice. He's described as having exaggerated levels of intelligence, sophisticated manners and cunningness, sometimes up to superhuman levels. Real psychopaths aren't omniscient geniuses who can diagnose people by their perfume while being elite painters and musicians at the same time. Hannibal is an elite psychopath, Hollywood invention that is too perfect and too theatrical. To wrap this level up, in early Hollywood, filmmakers had no real understanding of psychopathy as a clinical condition. They conflated it with generic villainy, insanity, or...
And some people base their diagnoses on freaking movies.
just being really evil, such as Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death and Cody Jarrett in White Heat. These portrayals played into public misunderstanding that genre villains like gangsters, mad scientists and slashers typified psychopathy. Clinical psychopathy is marked by persistent lack of empathy, shallow emotions, impulsivity, and often a charming yet manipulative, calculating and cold-hearted demeanor. Now, let's get into real portrayals of psychopaths, starting with
Level 2, the low functioning.
From a neurological standpoint, low-functioning psychopaths exhibit high testosterone combined with low serotonin levels, which creates impulsive and highly negative reactions. They struggle with emotional regulation, leading to explosive outbursts of anger, sudden bouts of depression, or rapid mood swings. Unlike their high-functioning counterparts, who plan carefully and maintain a facade, these individuals are marked by emotional volatility and impulsive, reactionary behavior. They are not smart enough to hide what they are. Annie Wilkes from Misery is a prime example exhibiting features ranging from emotional lability to delusional attachment to a fictional character. Another
Oh man, just like me and Scara. Just kidding.
example is Commodus from Gladiator. He is catastrophically low-functioning, petty.
I mean, when I go, when I go to Reddit threads, extreme fandoms, some of them name themselves as freaking, for example, Resi Code.
Reactive and driven entirely by a wounded ego. He can't manage his own emotional responses under pressure, such as when he murdered his own father in a fit of rage after learning he wouldn't inherit the throne, driven purely by jealousy and a pathological need for approval. Other low-functioning psychopaths would be Joseph from Creep, Franco Begbie from Trainspotting, and Tommy DeVito from Goodfellas. Remember the distinction: great character, bad clinical psychopath. Tommy DeVito is a great character, but he is a low-functioning psychopath. He exhibits extreme emotional dysregulation as shown when he murders Spider over a minor insult, demonstrating inability to modulate effective responses. These are high factor 2 traits such as impulsivity and aggression. As for Franco Begbie, he demonstrates poor behavioral controls and inability to maintain even criminal relationships due to unpredictable violent tendencies. Joseph is another that fits the mold of this level, as portrayed through his attempts at charm but failing. He also displays possible paraphilic disorders and cannot maintain convincing false self despite trying. Level 2 characters have the absence of empathy, the lack of remorse, the predatory instinct, but none of the intelligence, patience or self-control that makes a psychopath genuinely dangerous. But if we up the levels of psychopathy, we get
Level 3, the Mako.
According to the Hervé classification system, macho psychopaths have the second highest overall PCLR score among all subtypes, meaning they're extremely dangerous.
I hear you've got a job for me.
But here's what makes them distinct. They score low on the interpersonal factor, which is why they fall into level 3 as they have minimal charm and no smooth talking abilities. Unlike level 2's chaotic, uncontrolled violence, macho psychopaths use brutality systematically, such as orchestrating robberies, assaults and territorial violence. Characters such as Bill the Butcher from Gangs of New York, Colonel Nathan Jessup from A Few Good Men, and Nicky Santoro from Casino are macho psychopaths. Bill the Butcher perfectly embodies this tier. Classified as secondary macho, Bill controls the 5 points through sheer physical dominance and territorial brutality. He's intelligent enough to understand power dynamics, but his methods are medieval, ranging from public executions, gladiatorial combat, and donning visible scars as calling cards. Nicky Santoro from Casino is another primary macho psychopath in pure form. Joe Pesci's character operates through violence, intimidation, and terror. He demonstrates zero capacity for behavioral modulation and operates identically whether context requires subtlety or permits brutality, which reveals a pathological inability to calibrate force to strategic necessity. Where De Niro's character Ace maintains a sophisticated false self integrating into legitimate business, Nicky cannot suppress core psychopathy even when he's at risk. What separates this level from from others is that a macho psychopath is a subtype of antisocial personality disorder characterized by overt aggression, impulsivity, and the need for dominance, often using physical threats to intimidate. And before we move on, it would be a dream if you could help this channel reach 3,000 subscribers, and it's completely free. Thank you.
Level 4, the God Complex.
This tier represents psychopaths who developed a grandiose delusional framework around their actions, a fusion of narcissistic personality traits with psychopathic core features. Clinical literature describes these individuals as high-scoring on Factor 1 traits such as interpersonal and affective combined with pathological grandiosity. Unlike level 3 macho psychopaths who use force pragmatically, God complex psychopaths have ideological conviction that they're entitled to determine who lives or dies or
Damn!
deserves wealth or poverty. Characters such as Dr. Jed Hill from Malice, Alonzo Harris from Training Day, James Bond from 007, and Gordon Gekko from Wall Street embody this level. Using Dr. Jed Hill as an example, he is the purest cinematic representation of this complex. During a deposition, he delivers the infamous monologue, "You asked me if I have a God complex. I am God. I decide who lives and who dies." I'm surprised I haven't seen a TikTok video of that yet. James Bond represents another institutional God complex. He seduces, manipulates, and kills without remorse because the state has told him he's above conventional law. Unlike criminal psychopaths who fear consequences, Bond operates in a moral framework where his actions are pre-justified by national security. Finally, Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, one of my all-time favourite movie characters. Even the paper by Lightstead calls him, and I quote, probably one of the most interesting, manipulative, psychopathic fictional characters to date. Classified as primary manipulative, Gekko doesn't have to physically threaten anyone. Greed is good becomes his philosophy, and he uses it to seduce young broker Bud into insider trading, corporate espionage, and betraying his own father. He studies Bud's ambition, his father issues, his desperate need for validation. Then he crafts a persona, the successful father figure Bud wishes he had, and then weaponizes it. The paper highlights how he represents the rise of a successful psychopath. Individuals who climb to the top of legitimate industries by exploiting the same traits that would make others criminals.
Level 5, the Manipulator.
According to the Hervey classification, manipulative psychopaths score high on interpersonal and affective factors while scoring lower on the lifestyle behavioral factor. This means they have the charm, the superficiality, and the emotional coldness of psychopathy, leaning less on confrontational violence. In a way, this makes them more dangerous and parasitic, which is why I placed them in level 5.
OMG. That's the child.
Characters such as Aaron Stampler from Primal Fear, Esther from Orphan, Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, and Kevin from We Need to Talk About
Orphan Blood. Orphan.
Kevin define this level. Kevin is more of an outlier on this level despite demonstrating textbook primary psychopathy. He also exhibits congenital etiology. This is defined as abnormalities, in this case psychopathy, present at birth resulting from genetic factors. Therefore, you could make a case for him being higher, but I will touch on later why I placed him on this level. Anyway, the film explicitly explores nature versus nurture and concludes he was born this way, with no environmental trauma explaining his presentation. He scores high across all the Hervey factors. The first is interpersonal. This is demonstrated through his dual false selves, presented as a perfect son to his father, while systematically tormenting his mother through sophisticated manipulation from early childhood. The second is affective, through his complete empathy deficit, observable from infancy, as he unalives his sister's guinea pig, his father and sister, then executes a school massacre with zero emotional response or remorse. However, what prevents Kevin from reaching the absolute pinnacle is that the film still plays on certain stereotypes and cultural misnomers about psychopaths and teenage school shooters, adding theatrical elements that slightly compromise pure clinical accuracy. But now, when we raise the bar of psychopathy across each factor higher, we get
Level 6.
Flash!
Hello.
The puppet master.
This is where psychopathy transcends individual manipulation and enters the realm of systemic control. They've climbed legitimate power structures, accumulated resources and loyalties, and positioned themselves where their decisions can affect thousands of lives. Lou Bloom is the perfect embodiment of this level. He manipulates everyone around him and positions himself as a pure parasitic corporate psychopath operating within capitalism's incentive structures. He displays high factor 1 traits such as self-taught corporate vernacular, superficial charm mimicking business culture, and zero genuine affection beneath rehearsed speech patterns. According to Babiak's research, he demonstrates corporate psychopathic methodology. For example, he's used employees as disposable assets as evident when he lets Rick die to capture better footage and frames it as a business decision. Amon Goethe from Schindler's List is another example that shows how psychopathy can weaponize institutional power. Classified as primary classic idiopathic, Goethe is an SS officer who runs a particular type of camp. His high factor 1 traits are shown when he maintains positional professionalism while simultaneously embezzling right resources and operating slave labor. His relationship with Helen, a Jewish maid, reveals classic psychopathic ambivalence. This is evident from his attraction to her while beating her because he's neurologically incapable of processing emotional connection as anything but dominant submission dynamic. Finally, Alex Delage from Clockwork Orange sits on this level as a primary classic idiopathic psychopath. Alex achieves systemic influence through organizational leadership and ideological propagation. Alex demonstrates high interpersonal factor through charismatic leadership that maintains gang loyalty despite escalating brutality. The Ludovico technique scene reveals his psychopathy is so deeply embedded that behavioral conditioning fails. What elevates him to level 6 is that he doesn't operate alone. He's created a microsystem where psychopathic values become group culture, like the real case of Charles Manson. But now, let's move on to the cinematic peak of psychopathic portrayals with
Level 7, GOAT.
We've reached the pinnacle of a clinically perfect depiction of a psychopath. According to the Hervé classification system, the combination of primary, classic and idiopathic psychopaths have the highest overall PCLR scores and score high on all 3 factors. These are primary psychopaths who are born, not made. There's no childhood trauma to explain it and no environmental factors to blame. What elevates this level and separates them from the others is the combination of clinical accuracy, as I just mentioned, but equally as important the performance and portrayal from the actor. They portray characteristics that forensic psychiatrists watch and recognize as matching real-world psychopaths they've evaluated in prisons and hospitals. Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men is what the paper calls a well-designed, prototypical, idiopathic primary psychopath. What this means is that unlike God-complex psychopaths who construct ideological frameworks, Chigurh offers no philosophy or superiority complex. There simply is nothing about him from his background to his facial expressions. The paper compares Chigurh to Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, a real-life contract killer who also killed without emotion. The other character that makes this level is Henry from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, who is another clinically perfect depiction of a psychopath. Based on real serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, the film strips away every Hollywood convention. The paper highlights that the accuracies are depicted through his lack of insight, a powerful lack of empathy, emotional poverty, and well-illustrated failure to plan ahead. That last part is crucial. When watching the movie, we see Henry is disorganized, impulsive, and leaves bodies in plain sight. Despite this, he doesn't get
I mean, just like what we've heard about Dahmer, that person who stuffs his victims into his own drain. Yeah, I think that's a lack of planning.
get caught because investigators are looking for motive, pattern and meaning, and Henry has none of those. Clinical accuracy alone doesn't create unforgettable cinema. That requires actors who can embody that void. Javier Bardem and Michael Rooker deliver performances where the absence of emotion is clear and the empty stare communicates more than any dialogue could ever do. And remember, the team behind the paper watched 400 films and identified only a handful that achieved this balance. Level 7 is where psychiatry meets art, where diagnosis meets performance, and in my opinion, it's much more terrifying than any Hollywood caricature could ever be. And if you want to see the 7 levels of TV shows, check out this video here.
Become a Shopee VIP member with your first month free.
Itchy
Man,
brush
you know what? I never wanna look sa Max.
is ruining your makeup? Dream of pro-level perfection. Real Techniques brush set with ultra-soft fibers blends flawlessly. Lazada exclusive sale, authentic guaranteed. Tap to master your look.
Why did I leave this out? It's very...
Haley, I can heal you again.
What a heal! Yo, wake up!
Speed boosting myself.
Bravo, bravo. Let's stay in sync.
Every piece of his util gives you an assist.
The music is so cute when you're getting healed.
Oh, nice.
excuse me.
Today, fitness influencers are ditching health altogether and embracing extreme optimization instead, going so far as even drinking their own semen.
Nikolai is
What the frick?
going to give me his his divine protein shake.
Yes.
Steroid-induced fertility.
Get the frick out of here, man. I don't care how big you are or how handsome you are in the eyes of people, man. Get the frick out.
How do you not get girls pregnant?
Well, I'm infertile from steroids.
Getting locked away for psychosis.
I made it out. I made it out. I'm out of the psych ward. I'm out of the psych.
And even fatal
And some of them gotta be doing this ironically.
peptide overdoses.
On the morning of February 25th, 2022, Boston's heart gave out while working out at a gym down the street from his home.
This is a body that's destroyed, 100% destroyed from drugs. He had end-stage kidney disease.
Boston killed his kidneys with
Adipotide.
a peptide.
And it's only getting more popular. Tech billionaires are making transhumanism a reality, while Brian Johnson is spending $500 million on Project Blueprint, his project to cheat death itself and permanently alter the human race.
We really are at the stage of potentially the most extraordinary existence in the galaxy. So my objective is not life maximization, it's species maximization.
It's straight out of their favorite sci-fi stories. It is the merging of corporatism and transhumanism, as the money to be made off of these drugs will reach $335 billion in less than 10 years. But even with modern technologies and unlimited wealth, they still need something else to make this work. A society that sees their bodies as deficient and upgradable.
I was fat, ugly, like short, I'd say. When I started taking the steroids, all those things like definitely changed. Like I got more jacked and like better looking, honestly, I'd say for sure.
They need guinea pigs willing to risk their lives on extreme methods of human enhancement.
Welcome to another episode of Lab Rats, where I'm treating my body as a lab rat and letting you know what peptides did what to my body.
And the online fitness influencer trend was on hand to provide a cohort primed for that very thing.
500 chest, 80 tren, and 50 anabar daily pre-workout.
I'm doing 500 tests right now, a weekly, 500 mast, then every day 8 units of growth hormone, then insulin, 8 units pre-workout, 15 units post-workout, and Lantus insulin.
And now, I gotta tell you guys, I might not be streaming for a long time because it was rainy today and my solar setup didn't really charge fully.
I'm taking insulin 25 units every day. I'm doing BPC capsules for my digestion. And
Try not to. Gloves off!
For these billionaires and the emerging $300 billion enhancement substances markets, the gains in his athletes are just one station on the journey to the future of mankind. And influencers are the vehicle they are using to get us all on board.
And the cool thing about this substance is it is the pinnacle
You're in
of
for a
the
little shock.
daddy or not debate. Because this substance contains exogenous hormones, yet this substance is produced naturally. Yeah, it also has like follicle stimulating hormone. It has nerve growth factor. It is neuroregenerative. It protects against Alzheimer's. That when they give spermidine to animals, it has shown to increase their lifespan by 25%. So I started ingesting this substance, my own. And the results were incredible. I started feeling like a superhuman. My physique has gotten better. This protein shake of testosterone and spermidine and nerve growth factors is really incredible. And yeah, I'm gonna drink it. And this is gonna be on OnlyFans.
Conor Murphy was one of the most prominent influencers of the 2010 tennis boom. 4 million subscribers watched him work out, approach women shirtless in public, and debate whether he was natural or on steroids. He was good looking, funny, and physically impressive. And for a lot of young guys into the gym, he was exactly what they wanted to become. And that's exactly why what he became instead.
You know, I'd rather be medium set, but, you know, strong. Instead of good looking and tubing. I mean, being big is nicer. Yes, the notion is you're stronger. No.
Instead matters. Like most fitness influencers, he began with bodybuilding, making videos of his workouts, dieting, and impressive body transformation. He builds a large following as fitness influencer and explodes on YouTube. He's young, handsome, and obviously ripped. People, mainly other men, gravitate to him easily. But his transformation isn't really a giant tool. It's simply a solution for his insecurity, and the validation his audience gives him still isn't enough.
And think about it, man. Think of the reason why a lot of people started. They had like insecurities when they were young, so they started, you know, wanting to get bigger.
So he pivots away from pure fitness content and into vanity videos instead, walking around shirtless in public and getting women to touch him.
3 chances to guess the color of my shirt under my jacket. You want to see your new favorite color?
Stop right there!
It's cringeworthy, demeaning, and YouTube loves it. But it's still not enough for him. He wants to dominate the fitness influencer world. So he leans into the biggest debate in fitness at the time. The biggest debate isn't about pedophile transhumanism. It's much simpler. Are you natty or not?
I am natural. I've been natural since birth. Not one of those confidence me. As soon as you hop on something, you have to like do that for basically the rest of your life. Also, I hate needles.
And despite his principles, this is the point just before Conor the fitness influencer dies. Not literally, but psychologically. Up until now, his identity and sense of self-worth is rooted in his physique and being seen.
World Health Organization has just declared a global coronavirus. It is a pandemic.
COVID then killed his influences, leaving Murphy stuck indoors with no one to take his shirt off, which then leads to an identity crisis that he remedies with ayahuasca. And in doing so, firmly closes any debate about what happens when an egotistical narcissist resolves their ego by abusing the most powerful psychedelic on earth.
Got in the psych ward again. Shoot!
From here, he embraces more extreme optimization by drinking liquid protein, otherwise known as semen.
The results were incredible. I started feeling like a superhuman. You know, my physique has gotten better. My physique has gotten so much better over the past several weeks.
But keen to explore enhancement even further, he moved to Thailand, a paradise for enhancement athletes. PEDs are available and laws prohibiting them aren't enforced.
So yes, I decided to hop on anabolic steroids. So here's my physique on day 1, and here's my physique on day 30. Do I think it's natural or not? Well, to be honest, I don't give a fuck anymore.
And he goes much further. He becomes more expressive and goes from this to this.
Insecurity is a facet of our evolutionary design to ensure we seek evolutionary advantages. At its core, looks maxing is simply an attempt to gain an evolutionary advantage to maximize the chance of survival and reproduction.
But he doesn't stop there. he becomes a steroid and peptide influencer, setting up Natty Plus Protocol social media accounts promoting peptides, steroids, and the different stacks people can use to make the quickest gain. But Murphy is just one example of a broad pattern. The underlying issue push vulnerable people, many of them fitness influencers, into enhancement are widespread. They are cultivated by the same industries whose leaders are now pushing transhumanism. Once your body becomes a product, improvement isn't enough. It has to be optimization, then enhancement, and then whatever comes after. Scrolling through TikTok and YouTube shows, most fitness influencers are using steroids, peptides, and simply glorifying enhancements.
I only did 200 tests, 200 tries. And no, what? I did 400. Okay, yeah, I know what you did. 400 tests, 200 trim, 300 mass run, like 25 milligrams of Winstrol every day.
Now, if this were limited to adults, perhaps we could ignore it. They have agency. Their body's their choice. And now kids as young as 13 are using steroids and peptides. Eric English is a perfect example of how steroid washing is endangering young people. This is Eric as a fitness-obsessed 13. It's commendable. He's focused on fitness when most other kids his age are playing Fortnite. But soon, he starts taking a gig, and by the time he's 15, he already looks like a monster. And this isn't a one-off. Another steroided-up influencer admitted to helping Eric to bulk. This friend of his might be even more disturbing. He's 5'3" tall, 19 years old, 350 pounds, and can leg press more than most adult bodybuilders. Once you see how tech, social media, and manufactured insecurity combine to normalize and promote enhancement, you see just how insidious this movement truly is. The enhanced games aren't a harmless exercise in pushing humanity's limits. For the people funding the games and pushing enhancement as the next obvious stage in human evolution, it's an irreversible milestone in their harnessing of tech, social media, and societal body dysmorphia to engineer a society of enhanced humans.
I'm gonna build a country, and so I'm gonna build a don't die nation state.
Despite this trend of enhancement dressed up as health and fitness, the reality is many of these kids are unlikely to live to see 30. At the lighter end of the scale, side effects young influencers are seeing from enhancing drugs are the exact ones you'd want to avoid if you were insecure and wanted to look better, chronic acne being one of them. 16-year-old Martin Memphis is already seeing awful reactions to performance-enhancing drugs. Given the crossover with looks-maxing, you'd think this would be enough to stop them, but no. Because looks-maxing isn't just a trend, it's an industry, one that sells a drug for everything. This is what a market looks like when it's designed around insecurity. Stopping is never the answer is always the next product. Got acne from testosterone? Don't stop. Just take aromatase inhibitors to offset the acne. These inhibitors are now giving you joint pain? Well then, you just need some peptides. BPPC 157 should do it, or TB 500. And if they're not working, just hop on some growth hormone. Ipamorelin or CGC 1295 will take care of that.
If you decide to take HGH or IGF-1 LR3, it's a good way to segue into the whole world of pharmacology in terms of optimizing the mechanisms in your body.
Stopping is never the cure, more treatment is. And that's not an accident. The global enhancement substances market will be worth $335 billion by 2035. And that number doesn't exist without people who can never stop. The insecurity isn't a bug in the system, it's the business model. It's always been there, but it was found, fed, and given direction. Social media built the audience. The algorithm rewarded escalation. And further up the chain, people with money and a very specific vision for the future of the human species were paying attention. The enhanced games aren't invented. They're a press release for something that's been in development for years. It's why the billionaires backing this aren't spectators. In fact, they were never spectators.
You just have to remember that with the enhanced games, this is not just a sporting competition, this is a for-profit company. So these are people seeking to make money off the use of these substances.
Those pushing enhancements aren't doing this because they're interested in the human body, they're just ensuring they're ahead of the next curve. They want ownership of the next stage of human evolution. They want the IP behind enhancements. This isn't just a human experiment, it's product guinea pig testing for one of the biggest emerging markets.
Our mission is, as a company, to give everyone in the world the opportunity to enhance. And we do that by firstly creating awareness through sports that performance enhancements under the right clinical and medical supervision actually can be very good for people.
The transformation of fitness influencers into human experiments for new substances is exactly what deregulation advocates need. Regular gym goers aren't helpful. It needs to be posted, shared, and promoted. That's why the tech industry, particularly social media, is so key to all of this.
your social media feed at this point? Obviously, gym influencers, the top ones right now.
Do you think you would have gotten on steroids without social media?
No. Definitely seeing like people do it is like what makes you want to do it, for sure. It's not hard to get.
It needs to work its way through the algorithm and onto the screens of internet people, particularly the young. It's why Peter Thiel isn't just investing in the games, but also in influencers with no intentions of competing in any. And Brian Johnson started to replace them too, as he's not funding populist politicians or backing looks magazines. He's just eccentric and very open about everything he does. And unlike most billionaires, he does seem kind of harmless. A man just simply devoted to immortality, willing to turn his own body into a public science experiment. Some find him weird and funny, others admire him. But this is what makes him an unwritten ambassador for a darker ideology, lurking beneath his own. He makes enhancement aspirational. Our bodies are problems to be solved. It's the same idea as when a teenager injects peptides. Johnson just has better lighting and production and a more likable personality. Peter Thiel, however, doesn't use lighting. He just works in the shadows, letting others insidiously spread his worldview.
Thiel is also personally invested in signal boosting, friend of the show, Braden Clavicular Peters. He seems to have a vested interest in creating a post-humanist, technologically transformed future wherein real people like you and I cease to exist in our flesh form.
I'm an accelerationist in what I do. So you started taking testosterone when I was 14. And just the introduction of things like HGH and aromatase inhibitors, extremely young.
The rumors started with Clavicular's own stream on Twitch, where he reveals a certain Mr. P donated an enormous sum of money multiple times.
But P, he's going crazy, man. Already donated 500 and 100.
These donations are telling because this mysterious donor called P isn't just giving Club money. He's paying for thousands of other viewers' subscriptions to Club's channel, both funding Club and facilitating his online rise. He also spoke about how Thiel invited him to a party at his house, which he refused to go to as apparently Thiel wanted him there alone. And apparently a journalist revealed that Clark booted her into his house after she asked about the rumors of Thiel funding.
Of course, the rumors about him and Peter Thiel, because that is absolutely everything. Oh, we do a little journalism. The second that I brought up Peter Thiel and Palantir, he panicked.
It seems like a strange couplet, doesn't it? One of the world's most intelligent men who plays the long game, spending decades becoming the political puppet master of the modern world, while also having one of the most heavily guarded public personas. And then there's a 20-year-old who doesn't appear to deeply care about the future whatsoever and cares for nothing but visibility. But this does actually make sense. Clavicular is emblematic of the transformation of fitness influencers into enhanced humans and then into enhancement influencers.
Like, I think individualism is the most important thing to succeed. Like, I don't really think that you should strive to like get along with everyone. You should just try to advance yourself as much as possible.
The first focused on health and strength. The second focused on achieving the ideal look of health and strength. The third aren't truly interested in either. They just want to be seen as best in others.
I don't know too much about the modern fitness space. I think it's, I'm really disappointed in like the direction it's taken. You know, what I'm trying to get out of these like extreme looks maxing protocols is, you know, to basically mock people. That's like my main goal.
To show how different this is to the original bodybuilding fitness culture, influencers like Bob are destroying the capacity for the most definitive male action there is, impregnating women.
How do you not get girls pregnant?
Well, I'm infertile from steroids, so if I couldn't get her pregnant,
Absorption test.
The tech and Thiel's rumored interest in Clavicular and enhanced humans goes way beyond steroid Olympics and building something modern. He wants to use modern tech, substances, and now influencers to build a new world, or rather, a new version of the old one, a techno-feudalist society, where we become guinea pigs in a tech CEO's fever dream, and where women are just seen as statistics for a man's body.
When you do look at pictures, what do you think you'd be looking for outside of this? Well, obviously, not someone who's focused on career. Like, you don't want a girl who's wanted to work in like a corporate environment and working long hours. You need someone who's willing to, you know, start a family. Like, just a girl who is extremely like modest is another big one. Like, not wearing revealing stuff, like not posting on Instagram. Your girlfriend, your wife, is an extension of you. So if she's not doing everything in her power to make you look better as a person, then that's just not something that you should want to get into. I don't really like
a woman who tries to be super educated.
Why would Till want this? He's perhaps the most powerful billionaire on Earth. So why does he need to bend society to his will? Well, the answer is more disturbing than anything you've seen in this video.
We could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead people who are never going to agree with you. This is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
The Dark Enlightenment is movements that believe democracy is wrong, the hierarchy is natural, and that the technologically superior elite should rule.
Politics has become so broken and so dysfunctional is to find a way to escape from it. It's not a way to fix it, it is a way to escape.
If you believe that, an influencer who calls unenhanced people subhuman isn't a problem. He's just proof of concept.
You know, but you're talking to people with genetically low intellect who are extremely subhuman.
What's subhuman?
Subhuman is a term that we use in like the Luxmax community for like horrendously ugly people.
It sounds like incel language, but it's also exactly the philosophical position of the movement Till has spent his fortune normalizing.
These Luxmax creators, we're all genetically gifted.
The movement has eerie parallels to scientific eugenics being applied to society, while they also want to establish authoritarian city-states where tech elites can remove themselves from democracy, and where ideal humans are competed for as citizens.
Del Monte Heart Smart helps lower cholesterol in as early as 4 weeks. Para sa pusong...
I think we can try to, create autonomous countries on oceans, underwater, all sorts of other spaces.
And it's not just Till. There's tons of others behind it in Silicon Valley. Sam Altman, Mark Andreessen, even Brian Johnson. And influencers like Clav just appear like prime tools to normalize this message.
I think everyone should be on testosterone.
Fitness influencing's transformation into a modern pseudo-eugenics program for an anti-democratic tech utopia sounds extreme. But this idea that some humans are biologically superior, and that society should be reorganized around that, seems like something we've seen before, and it always ends badly. Till was born in Germany, and allegedly one of his biggest influences on his worldview was actually Carl Schmitt, otherwise known as the crown jurist of the Third Reich. A fervent authoritarian who made philosophical justifications for the extermination of people he believed to be subhuman. In an interview about Schmitt's influence on his worldview, Till specifically equates Schmitt's analysis on politics and democracy in pre-Nazi Germany to the problems he sees with democracy today.
There are certainly certain parallels in the US in the 2020s to Germany in the 1920s, where liberalism is exhausted. One suspects that democracy, whatever that means, is exhausted, and we have to ask some questions very far outside the open window. That's sort of where I find Schmitt quite powerful as a thinker.
His use of an Olympic-style event to showcase and further his aim of superior humans is weirdly similar to the Berlin Olympics in 1936. But the long-missing piece of eugenics and transhumanism has now arrived. The final piece of the puzzle that will permanently tie together tech, power, and the future of humanity.
This morning, the little boy we've been following for months, who received the first-of-its-kind gene therapy for a potentially fatal disease, is marking major developmental milestones. Earlier this year, he became the first patient in the world to receive a personalized gene editing therapy.
Gene editing is now here, and while the case of a baby being saved is heartening, the reality is the billionaires funding this aren't doing this for sick children. They likely use this like the UK government uses child as a way to control the internet. Using children is always the front. And like the promise of AI, this won't be immediately deployed worldwide, but it will be controlled by wealthy tech elites for their own benefit.
I'm traveling to a remote island for an extreme medical procedure that could change the future of humanity. In the shadow of the Caribbean lies Roatan, a hidden gem off the Honduran coast, shrouded in mystery. Roatan hides a secret venture, Prospera, an experimental zone for governance. Prospera defies convention, crafting its own laws in a game of high geopolitical stakes against the Honduran government's backlash. I'm traveling to the heart of Prospera to find Minicircle, a biohacking company rewriting the rules of wellness.
Cut to the chase.
Their target, follistatin gene therapy, a pioneering technology with the potential to improve muscle and strength, slow the speed of aging, and many more benefits.
Prospera is the first of the sovereign city-states created by the tech billionaires behind the Dark Enlightenment movement. A mini-circle, the company using Prospera and its lack of regulation to experiment with gene therapy, is funded by those same tech billionaires, the Sam Altmans, the Peter Thiels. The enhanced game shows us where they are dragging us, but it also distracts from what we aren't allowed to see, an experiment within an experiment. The holy grail of transhumanism, gene editing, being carried out secretly in the Vatican of the network states. The enhanced games aren't an absurd anomaly, they are just the tip of the iceberg that's already sinking us. Tech billionaires built the technology that allowed ideas to spread globally and immediately. They took control of the trends and influences to spread their very messages on social media. They catapulted agreeable politicians into power and captured the governments they openly planned to destroy. And now these politicians roll out the policy designed to accelerate the Dark Enlightenment's transformation of society, to become one where immortal tech billionaires own everything, are accountable to no one, and the subhumans are left to fend for themselves. With a society that once acted as a safety net stripped away.
Past generations of Americans pursued big dreams and daring projects that once seemed absolutely impossible. They pushed across an unsettled continent and built new cities in the wild frontier. We should hold a contest to charter up to 10 new cities and award them to the best proposals for development. In other words, we'll actually build new cities in our country again. These freedom cities will reopen the frontier, reignite American imagination.
They call it freedom, but somewhere between the freedom cities and the psych ward, between species maximization and a 16-year-old with steroid acne, something got lost. The people at the bottom of the experiment were never going to be the ones who inherited the future being built for them. They just made it look desirable.
That's how it ends. No anime fans. What the frick? Okay, hold on.
Nalaman niya kung sino talaga si Lea Valderrama.
On Mount Everest, a warning is not a suggestion. On Mount Everest, if an experienced Sherpa tells you to turn around, then you better do it or else. But when Sharia Shah Chlorphine was given that exact warning, she ignored it. And it gets worse, because that was only one of 4 distinct warnings that she was given before she even reached the summit of Mount Everest. She ignored every single one of them, and at first, she seemed to be rewarded for this. On May 19th, 2012, after nearly 20 hours of climbing through the death zone, Sharia finally pulled herself onto the summit, the highest point on Earth. She had literally mortgaged her house to pay her way here. She had trusted a brand new guiding company that had never successfully put a client on top of Everest, by the way, in order to get here. Sharia had dreamed of this moment since she was 9 years old. And in what must have been the most exciting moment of her life, she paused for a photo, of course. And while you can't fully see her face because of her oxygen mask, you can still tell that she's smiling. For a few minutes, it must have felt like she had proven the entire world wrong, including that overly paranoid Sherpa who had told her to turn around. However, Everest doesn't care if you made it to the top, it only cares if you can get yourself back down. And as Sharia stood there triumphantly on the summit, she had no idea that less than 8 hours later, she would be collapsed in the snow, literally begging her Sherpas to save her. But that's the harshest version of what happened. There's actually another version of that exact same story, a version where Sharia was sold a dream turned nightmare by the Mount Everest Industrial Complex. And by the time that anyone tried to stop her, they had already taken her money, and it was far too late. Sharia Shah was born on January 11th, 1979 in Kathmandu, Nepal, where, of course, the Himalayan peaks loom in the distance like giants, daring to be climbed almost. When Sharia was 9 years old, her parents actually arranged something very special for her. It was this helicopter tour of the highest parts of the Himalayas, which was actually a pretty rare privilege that most Nepalese children could only dream about. The helicopter lifted off and rose higher and higher, carrying young Sharia towards the mountains that she'd always seen from a distance, but never from like up close, you know? The sun was even rising on Mount Everest as they approached, and the view was breathtaking. The kind of beauty that stays in a child's imagination forever. In this moment, Sharia turned to her parents and she asked them why they weren't climbing the mountain themselves. You know, why people didn't just walk up there like she had just walked up the hills near their home. And her parents explained, of course, that, well, climbing Mount Everest was very difficult. It was also very expensive, and that reaching the summit by foot was something that only very few people in the world could actually accomplish. Oh, and another thing that only a few people in the world actually accomplish is reaching 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I haven't accomplished it yet, but if you look at my numbers, you'll see that I'm really close, and so if you're a repeat viewer, please hit subscribe, and if you're a new viewer, you don't have to do it yet. I'm gonna do my best to earn your subscription by the end of this video. Now, this helicopter ride was like the moment, according to everyone who knew Sharia at least, the moment when the idea of climbing Mount Everest took root. I mean, I can just see 9-year-old Sharia kind of saying to herself, you know, one day I'll do that. One day I'll stand on top of that mountain. When Sharia was 21, she ended up taking a job as an assistant purser on a cruise ship. She was basically drawn to any experiences that would let her see the world, and this particular job was a great way to do just that. And so it was there, somewhere out on the open ocean, that Sharia met a man named Bruce Chlorphine. Bruce was a Canadian citizen who had been working on cruise ships for years as a pianist. He was about a decade older than Sharia, and on paper they pretty much had nothing in common. I mean, Bruce was Jewish, Sharia was Hindu, Bruce was Canadian, Sharia was Nepalese. Bruce had a relatively stable life, and Sharia basically had the complete opposite. And yet, despite all these differences, the couple had an instant connection that transcended all of that. You see, before Sharia's mother had passed away, she had selected a Mumbai doctor for Sharia to marry, like as an arranged partner. But Sharia basically shunned this man completely. And so ultimately, she moved to Canada, and in 2002, she married Bruce.
Storm burning! Now move! Hasten, hurry!
This was a choice that said pretty much everything about who Sharia was. She was someone who would make her own path, even if it meant defying tradition and family plans, and even advice from, close family members. Anyways, the couple would end up settling in Toronto, where Sharia became a fashion buyer while also building her own businesses on the side. She threw herself right into her adopted country with the same intensity that she brought to everything else in her life. For instance, she involved herself in women's organizations, children's groups, and even politics. And this is crazy, politics, because in 2011, she actually ran as a candidate in a local election. Now, she didn't win, but that wasn't really the point. You see, Sharia was never someone who did things, halfway. And that summer, she demonstrated exactly how far she'd go when she believed in something. A friend invited Sharia to a small protest outside of the Ontario legislature. Maybe a dozen people demanding the government do something about high auto insurance costs and rising gas prices. I don't really know, and actually, speaking of that, Sharia didn't really know either. She knew pretty much nothing about these issues, but when the organizers announced that they were staging a hunger strike and would take no food or water until they got a meeting, Sharia immediately joined in. And actually, she didn't just join in, she kind of became the main character. On day 3 of this hunger strike, Sharia collapsed and had to be taken to the hospital. And then a few hours later, when she was released, she was right back on that lawn protesting once again. This hunger strike ended up fizzling out after about 5 days when the police eventually ordered them to clear out or they would all be arrested. But Sharia had shown that when she committed to something, she committed completely in consequences or even her own health and hydration, well, all of that could be damned. And as much as you have to respect her commitment here, I do hope that you guys out there take your hydration a bit more seriously. I know that's something that I've been trying to do lately, which happens to be why I'm so excited to tell you about Drink Element, who is the best electrolyte company in the game. Element is the sponsor of this video, and what makes them different from all of the other electrolyte drinks that you've seen ads for is that Element has the best electrolyte ratio. Each stick has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. And you notice what it doesn't have? That would be sugar. And that matters because when you're sweating, sodium is the main thing that your body is actually losing, not sugar. A lot of the other electrolyte drink mixes out there just taste like they were designed by a candy company that accidentally heard about hydration one time. But Element is so much different. It's salty, it's simple, and it's made for people who actually sweat, not people with a sweet tooth. I like to keep a few sticks in my backpack or my van or my gym bag because it's honestly one of the easiest ways to stay on top of your hydration. Oh, and by the way, Element just came out with a new flavor called Lemonade Iced Tea, which actually has a little bit of caffeine in it from black tea, and I genuinely cannot wait to try this. And so if any of you have tried it out there, please let me know how it is. And actually, a great way to try it would be to go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. And when you place an order through my link, Element is going to throw in a sample pack with 8 additional sticks for no extra cost. And so one more time, drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go get yourself some free Elements. And with that said, let's get back to this story. So obviously, Sharia's life was just a complete whirlwind, moving to Canada, marriage, the business, the politics, the hunger strike. But throughout all of that stuff, there was one constant dream that remained. And that, of course, was Mount Everest, the same mountain that she'd seen from the helicopter when she was just 9 years old. The summit that her parents had told her was basically impossible to reach. And so in 2010, Sharia decided that it was time to stop dreaming and time to start climbing. And let's just get this next detail out of the way right now because it's really important. Before 2010, Sharia had exactly 0 experience mountaineering. She had never climbed a significant peak before. She'd never been at high altitude. She'd never tested herself in conditions even remotely similar to what she'd face on Mount Everest. But what she did have was determination a childhood dream, and $100,000 worth of debt that she was willing to take on in order to make that dream happen. Once Sharia set her sights on Mount Everest, the training started. Every single day for almost 2 years, she would run or walk a half marathon, often carrying a heavy pack on her back for a lot of it. She was building the kind of cardiovascular endurance, as well as leg strength, that would keep her moving at altitude. She also did indoor rock climbing to develop upper body strength, and she also learned the basics when it comes to climbing movements. Sharia maintained this regimen with the same intensity that she brought to everything else in her life, basically sculpting her body into something that could potentially survive the death zone. But here's what she didn't do. As far as I could tell, she didn't actually climb any real mountains. She didn't test herself at altitude to see how her body would respond to oxygen deprivation. She didn't learn the dozens and dozens of technical skills that separate recreational hikers from true mountaineers. You know, things like how to arrest a fall with an ice axe, or how to navigate crevasse fields, how to read weather patterns at high altitude, or how to manage your oxygen supply over a multi-day climb. Her entire preparation consisted of getting physically fit, while hoping that the Everest company she would eventually hire could teach her everything else that she needed to know. And somehow, she found that company, a company called Utmost Adventure Trekking, which was a brand new operation that had literally never successfully guided anyone to Everest's summit before 2012. And so with that, you're probably wondering, why the hell did she choose them then? Sharia chose them through some family connections in Nepal. That was a big part of it. And another big part of it was the price, which was on the lower end. I mean, it probably seemed like a bargain. However, once you add in equipment and airfare, a ton of other expenses, the total bill for Sharia's dream still came out to about $100,000. And that was a lot more money than Sharia had. But she also wasn't going to let that stop her, of course. I mean, not even her husband Bruce could persuade her not to do this at this point.
Hold on, let me check something. Okay, I'm back.
Ashut Sarasgom! Hoskala Ilkalag! Haskala Fata Dumskalki! Karins Fakazad! Haskala Fata Dumskalki! Vai salto! Alskon! Taktalas!
Yo, good morning. Yeah, it is. You know, yeah, like I said, it was raining here. You know, we collect rainwater and whatever. I think I'm gonna put some rainwater in my crayfish's tank. And then, you know, I really hope it's sunny tomorrow. And then I do hope that it rains during the night.
Uzet ulla elkramus! Haskala fata skalki! Ut udiol ardugal! Yeah! Drafter! There! Rashkasat water!
Lol.
Ula ut adugal fauto! Ei!
Looks maxing.
There!
Oh, frick. Oh, it's not ranged. Oh, that's great. I thought it was ranged.
Haskala fata skalki! Der ins vakazad! Afisa elgramus! Ula ut adugal fautu! Alskal! Al-har-har! Askala il-kalag! Askala fatraptja! Askul ula waku! Oti duan rakdak! Askul ula waku! Ratja! Askala fatraptja! Utmusa hutus! Mus! Uti duan rakdak! Askul ula waku! Al-har-haru! Vishana! Ram! Zagbentok! Haskala fata skalki! Askul ula waku! Ut idu wanragda! Mus! Ula prit uskul! Telskos! Hashutdaras! Traskas! Isgos!
Oh, they also have warriors.
Oras Ardongles! Arzuadardu Adu! Ha Shujibarto! He's gone! Ashkal El Gramur! Arak! Dran! Bajito Demak! Gondor!
What the frick? I'm gonna play Counter-Strike.
I mean, he knew his wife well enough to support her fully. He couldn't talk her out of it. And so ultimately, the couple agreed to take out a second mortgage on their home so that Sharia could pursue this dream. And apparently even that wasn't enough to finance this trip, because Sharia then created a website where she asked for donations and promoted her goal of becoming the first South Asian woman from Canada to summit Mount Everest. And that's kind of a mouthful, but you know, if I was the first person from Rice Memorial High School in Burlington, Vermont, for instance, to summit Mount Everest, I'd probably brag about that forever. But back to Sharia's website, which actually featured a digitally altered photograph of her standing in front of Everest, which was kind of weird. It also included inspirational messages about how nothing is impossible and how even the word impossible says I'm possible. Get it? She also started organizing fundraising events around town, hoping to gather supports and maybe even raise some money for Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children. On the surface, Sharia's Everest campaign was actually building some real momentum. However, it's important to know that behind the scenes, her friends and her family were expressing genuine concerns to her, and they kind of collectively became the first major warning to Sharia, telling her not to go up Mount Everest. But Sharia was Sharia. She was strong-willed, she was determined, she was the kind of person who nearly starved herself to death for a political cause she barely even understood. And so when her Canadian friends and family members expressed doubt about her Everest ambitions, I can imagine that Sharia took them to heart, but she probably didn't take them all that seriously. So warning number 1 was ignored, and in April of 2012, at 33 years old, Sharia arrived at Everest Base Camp, and she met the company that would be coordinating her dream climb, Utmost Adventure Trekking. Now, Utmost Adventure Trekking's plan was very simple. They were going to teach Sharia everything she needed to know about mountaineering between Base Camp and Camp 4 of Mount Everest, also that by the time she got into the death zone, she would have a little bit of experience climbing at altitude. And if you think about it, this is kind of an insane approach. I mean, I'm no Mount Everest expert, but this feels to me at least like the kind of approach that no reputable guiding company would ever consider. But Utmost Adventure Trekking apparently wasn't exactly a reputable company yet. I mean, they were kind of a startup after all, and they were desperate for clients. They were willing to take on anyone who could pay them, and so to them, the only way to get experienced clients was to just have them gain experience once they got to Everest, which I guess makes a little bit of sense, but I mean, I don't know. Anyways, during her month of training on Mount Everest itself, problems became immediately apparent, and this led to the second warning that Sharia received about her expedition. Again, you have to remember that while she was physically fit, she wasn't just like an amateur climber. She was literally a total beginner. She had to be taught almost everything, including like the most basic things, like how to put on crampons, for instance. And that's something that, you know, most climbers are going to learn on smaller mountains well before they even set foot on Everest, but instead Sharia was learning this literally at the very last minute. It's almost like learning to drive on the Autobahn or learning to swim in like the deep ocean. I mean, it's technically possible, but you're also kind of setting yourself up for disaster.
Ay, baliktad. Baliktad pa rin? Yan talaga. Bumaliktad ka na.
The company's expedition manager, a man named Rishi Raj Kadel, he watched Sharia struggle during training and later admitted, quote, "She's slow. Everyone knew she was slow." But Rishi also said something else that reveals Utmost Adventure Trekking's approach to climbing. He said, quote, "She wasn't sick from altitude, never any headaches. She continued walking." The way that I interpret that, which may or may not be correct, is that he's kind of saying that as long as she wasn't like actively dying during training, then, you know, they could consider her fit enough to attempt the summit. And again, that's me editorializing, but like, I don't know how else to read that. Maybe I'm wrong. Now, it's important to note that Sharia's husband, Bruce, you know, who was back home in Toronto, well, he says that his wife never told him about her struggles during training, even though they were, you know, in frequent phone contact throughout her time at Everest Base Camp. Which raises another question. Should Utmost Adventure Trekking have called Bruce to like make sure he understood the danger that his wife might be putting herself in? Especially since Sharia was there all alone. You know, it just feels a little weird that Bruce learned about all of these failed training runs and these serious warnings after what I'm about to tell you about had already happened. So this second warning, which was more of like a series of giant red flags, was not only ignored by Sharia, but it was also ignored by most of the people at Utmost Adventure Trekking. And yet, despite all of this, Sharia and the Utmost Adventure Trekking team,
I think they really needed publicity.
Began their climb, like their actual climb up Mount Everest, feeling oddly confident in their plan. However, just as things were about to get really, really serious, a third warning came right around the time after Sharia had reached Camp 3. You see, when she attempted to climb from Camp 3 up the Lhotse face in order to reach Camp 4, this took her over 7 hours. Now, to be fair, if I were to do this climb, it would probably take about 7,000 hours, but just to put it in perspective, a typical climber does this in under 5 hours. And so being 2 hours slower than average on a training climb is a pretty massive concern. It's a sign that someone just fundamentally is not ready for the challenges ahead. And this is exactly when Utmost Adventure Trekking's most senior Sherpa, aka the most experienced guide that they had, well, he threw in the towel on Sharia's summit hopes. As the date for her summit push approached, he actually changed his mind about guiding Sharia. He told her directly that she would basically be putting her life on the line as well as the lives of her Sherpas, and it was just not safe for anyone for her to actually attempt to summit Mount Everest. And clearly, this wasn't just a casual statement or a gentle suggestion. I mean, it was a direct warning from an experienced mountaineer, a warning that this attempt would likely end in Sharia's death as well as the deaths of those around her. But regardless of this, Utmost Adventure Trekking, you know, faced with a client who'd paid $100,000 and mortgaged her house for this attempt and was now standing on Everest with them, by the way, well, they made a decision that prioritized business over safety. Because the senior Sherpa bailed, Sharia was then assigned to 2 less experienced Sherpas, some younger guides who didn't have the seniority to refuse a paying client the way that the senior Sherpa had. The company's lead guide and managing director, a man named Nik Vtuber, decided that he and the senior Sherpa who was signing off from Sharia's expedition would focus on some other clients and their own summit attempts rather than helping the most inexperienced climber. And to be clear, nothing about this is illegal, but it sure feels insane, right? I mean, all I can think was like maybe they were hoping that Sharia would just come to her senses and just give up on summiting Everest before it actually got dangerous. However, if that was what they were thinking, and I don't know that for sure, they clearly didn't know anything about Sharia and her feelings about impossible. They didn't know how stubborn she was, how driven she was to accomplish her goals. Sharia was obviously not going to bail on this attempt, and it was very clear by now that Utmost Adventure Trekking was essentially operating under the idea that the customer was always right, which is usually pretty valid, but on Mount Everest, well, customers turn into casualties just like that. On May 18th, 2012, at 7:30 in the evening, Sharia began her final summit push. And I want to be clear here, according to my research anyways, starting a summit attempt at 7:30 p.m. is already a bit unusual. Most climbers will leave Camp 4 right around midnight. They kind of time their push so that they reach the summit in the morning and then have the entire afternoon to descend before darkness, and also the dropping temperatures. You know, both those things make everything way more dangerous. However, we know that Sharia was very slow, and her Sherpas knew this as well, and so the early start was meant to keep her from getting stuck in the massive traffic jams that had already been plaguing Everest in this particular season. Which, like, as if Sharia wasn't already in some trouble, well, the 2012 climbing season was shaping up to be one of the worst since 1996. And if you know anything about Mount Everest history, you know how much of a deadly disaster the 1996 season was. More than 500 climbers and guides had arrived at base camp by the spring of 2012, all aiming for the same narrow weather window when conditions on the summit would be survivable. And the result was, predictably, bottlenecks on the climbing route, where dozens of climbers would wait for hours at critical choke points. Some climbers reported waiting up to 2 hours at one single bottleneck in the death zone of Mount Everest, where 80-mile-per-hour winds blasted them over and over. People became disoriented, exhausted, frostbitten, you name it. I mean, it was just a terrible place to be, and it was no wonder that some climbers ended up just saying to hell with it and turned back. But surprisingly, as Sharia climbed right into all of this chaos with her two junior Sherpas beside her, at first she was actually feeling pretty good, like really good. And that's because she was already tapping her supplemental oxygen supply at a slightly higher than usual rate. Her body simply needed more oxygen to function than, you know, more experienced climbers. And while you can probably understand why this is going to be a problem very shortly, this did temporarily give her and her Sherpas some added confidence that maybe she could actually do this damn thing, and maybe she could actually summit Mount Everest.
Enjoy sa oily foods. Pero biglang nangasim ang tiyan? I-Kreml S na yan! The best brand for hyperacidity. Works in as fast as 5 minutes.
And so while other more experienced climbers began to turn back due to the delays and the brutal winds, Sharia and her Sherpas, they kept pushing forward. This has like all of the markings of an underdog story, right? Which is exactly what makes the fourth warning and what happened after it just so unbelievable. I don't know how else to say it. As Sharia climbed higher and higher through the darkness and the thin air, a man named Ganesh Thakuri was coming down from his own successful summit. Now, Ganesh happened to be the managing director of Utmost Adventure Trekking, and he ran right into Sharia and her young Sherpas on that route near the south summit, which is about 500 feet away from the actual summit. Now, in this brief meeting, Ganesh immediately recognized a problem. That was that Sharia was almost out of oxygen. The bottles were nearly empty, and she'd been climbing for close to 17 hours at this point, and she hadn't even gotten through the Hillary step yet, by the way. And so Ganesh was the one who presented the fourth warning to Sharia. He tried to convince her to turn around. When you're in the death zone like this, running out of oxygen isn't just like an inconvenience. It's essentially a funeral invitation. Your brain starts to shut down, your muscles stop responding, your judgment becomes so impaired you can't even recognize that you're dying. And of course, Ganesh knew all of this. He knew what would happen if Sharia continued on, and so he begged her. He begged her to descend right now while she still had enough oxygen and strength to survive. But Sharia's response was blunt, and by this point in the story, very predictable. She said something along the lines of, "I spent money and my goal is to reach the summit. I will go." Now, technically, Ganesh could have done more to stop Sharia. I mean, he wasn't just a random guide. He was literally the managing director of her expedition company. He could have made the Sherpas, who he was technically in charge of, turn her around. He could have exercised the authority that every guiding company reserves to abort a summit attempt when conditions become too dangerous. There's a lot of things he could have done, but Sharia was just so headstrong that instead Ganesh gave her one more bottle of oxygen, which she cracked open immediately, and then he let her keep climbing. Fourth warning, ignored by Sharia and unenforced by Utmost Adventure Trekking. After almost 20 hours of dragging herself up the mountain, which is nearly twice as long as it should have taken, by the way, Sharia reached the summit of Mount Everest at 2:20 p.m. on May 19th, 2012. And she actually stood up there for almost half an hour, taking in this moment that she dreamed about since she was literally 9 years old, also posing for photographs with the prayer flags and the curvature of the earth visible in the background. I mean, it is an incredible thing. Back at base camp, the expedition manager called Bruce, who was home in Toronto. It was actually 5:30 in the morning there, and so Bruce was awoken by the happy news that his wife had successfully summited. By breakfast, word had spread through Sharia's circle of supporters that she had actually accomplished that seemingly impossible childhood dream, as well as the record she was chasing. I mean, Sharia had become the very first woman of South Asian descent from Canada to summit Mount Everest. She'd proven everyone wrong, like that senior Sherpa who'd quit on her, or the friends who tried to stop her, everyone who doubted that a woman with zero mountaineering experience could mortgage her house and buy her way to the top of the world. All that was left now was for her to get down the mountain. And folks, Sharia was already in trouble before she even started her descent. She'd been in the death zone for almost 20 hours by this point, and her body had just been pushed beyond its limits. She knew that she was about to be in for the fight of her life, but what she didn't know was that she was already screwed, and maybe not even by her own doing. According to Russell Bryce, who is a veteran Everest guide from New Zealand, Utmost Adventure Trekking had simply given Sharia enough oxygen to reach the summit, but not enough for the return trip. And if that's true, I mean, that is just pure incompetence. If Utmost Adventure Trekking really believed that the customer was always right, then they should have loaded Sharia up with enough oxygen to at least stand a chance at making it down. Almost as soon as the descent began, the situation became critical, like super fast. According to one of the Sherpas who later testified, quote, "She could stand only if the two of us held her, and that for just a short while, but if she moved her legs, she would fall." And so the Sherpas were now essentially carrying a paralyzed woman down one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth, while hundreds of other climbers squeezed past them on this very narrow route. And, as if it couldn't get any worse, Everest's weather decided to contribute to this nightmare scenario. Strong winds struck Sharia and her Sherpas as darkness crept over the mountain. And it gets worse.
Cheese Whiz has calcium that helps make your bones strong. Cheese Whiz, for the strength to do more.
Somewhere in all of this chaos, Sharia became disconnected from her oxygen supply, and so without supplemental oxygen at this altitude, death comes very quickly, which, at this point, may have been the merciful outcome, not one we want, obviously, but you get what I'm saying. The Sherpas kept pushing her along, both physically and verbally, trying to keep her conscious and moving. They placed her arms on their shoulders and helped her walk, but Sharia was just too weak. She kept collapsing, and sometime right around 10 p.m. on May 19th, roughly 27 hours after she'd started climbing, Sharia laid down in the snow and spoke her final words. She said, quote, "Save me." Sharia died less than 1,000 feet from Camp 4 on May 19th, 2012, the same day that she took that smiling picture at the top of Mount Everest. She was draped in a Canadian flag, and then she was left there as the junior Sherpas prioritized saving their own lives at this point instead of bringing her now lifeless body down with them. But folks, despite her death, Sharia did not just disappear or become irrelevant. Actually, quite the opposite happened. Literally the next day, climber Leanne Shuttleworth and her father encountered Sharia's body during their descent from the summit. Sharia was apparently still clipped into the climbing line in the position where she had died, and so these climbers had to maneuver around her in order to continue down the mountain, which is terrible, but not exactly unheard of on Mount Everest. And for 10 days, dozens of more climbers had to do the exact same thing, this horrifying maneuver around Sharia's body, until finally a team of Sherpas recovered her body and brought her down to Camp 2, where eventually a helicopter could attempt retrieval. Which is something I want you to think about for a second. I mean, think about how all of those years earlier, 9-year-old Sharia saw the Himalayas up close on that magical helicopter ride, and now this final helicopter ride would seal her fate. But the thing is, the 2012 climbing season wasn't just a disaster for Sharia, but for the entire Mount Everest industry. 3 more people died on Everest the very same day as Sharia, bringing the 2012 season's death toll to 10, which, to my knowledge, made it the most deadly year on Everest since 1996, up until that point. But unlike in 1996, when the weather was pretty much the main culprit, there was a lot more human impact to point to for these deaths, which for a lot of people was completely inexcusable. The Mount Everest industry had been thrown into scandal year after year, and it all was kind of boiling over now. People needed answers. And maybe even more than that, actually, they needed someone to blame. And this is when things didn't only get complicated, but they actually got quite strange. Now, as soon as the word got out about what happened to Sharia, a media firestorm was unleashed from 2 competing angles. The first angle that emerged in the media was basically that a woman ignores warnings and dies on Everest. And, you know, as I've been kind of emphasizing throughout this video, there's a lot of truth to that angle. I mean, she literally ignored the 4 biggest warnings of her entire life, and she paid the price for it. However, I do want to say that focusing only on Sharia's mistakes ignores a much larger issue here, which is that Utmost Adventure Trekking never should have accepted her as a client in the first place. Again, they were this brand new startup company with no Everest pedigree, and they took on a complete novice with 0 mountaineering experience and promised to teach her everything she needed to know basically at the last minute. To me, that's not guiding. That's tempting Everest to unleash its very worst on your paying client. And folks, that was the second angle that the media discussed. The angle that Utmost Adventure Trekking was to blame for setting Sharia up to fail, which is a very big claim, but I'm not the one who made it. Several Everest experts actually did. Russell Bryce, who actually canceled his own Everest expedition in 2012 out of safety concerns, well, he was brutal in his criticism of Utmost Adventure Trekking, essentially allowing Sharia to climb Everest in the first place. He said that companies should always put saving lives ahead of reaching the summit, and at least to me, Utmost clearly did not grasp that concept well enough to enforce it. Grayson Schaefer, who was a journalist from Outside Magazine, who was also at Everest Base Camp in 2012, pointed out that pairing inexperienced Sherpas with an inexperienced climber was just a terrible decision as well. I mean, any responsible company would have assigned their most experienced guides to Sharia specifically because she needed the support more than a typical climber. But that is not what happened. Instead, when that senior Sherpa basically declined to Sharia up the mountain, Utmost Adventure Trekking's response was to assign her to junior Sherpas. They overlooked the amateur skills that Sharia displayed during her training and sent her up the mountain anyways, also possibly with insufficient oxygen.
Counter-terrorists win.
Meow meow.
And speaking of oxygen, don't forget that when Ganesh met Sharia near the summit and saw that she was running out of oxygen, he responded to her refusal not by exercising his authority to end the climb, but instead by giving her one more bottle of oxygen, essentially enabling her to continue. It seems to me that every step of the way, Utmost Adventure Trekking prioritized getting Sharia to the summit over getting her home alive. They, in combination with Sharia herself, gambled with Sharia's life, and they lost. But this controversy is much larger than just Sharia. The transformation of the world's highest peak into this destination where anyone with enough money can attempt a summit, well, it's created a very toxic situation around the mountain. Companies are competing on price, which means that they're incentivized to cut corners on supports and safety. And it goes deeper because the Nepalese government issues permits to almost anyone who can pay the fee, even if they're maybe not qualified to come down, because, well, those permits fund the tourism ministry. And then on the mountain, traffic jams form these bottlenecks because there's no meaningful restrictions on how many people can attempt the summit during any given weather window. And way up in the death zone, because no Sherpa can physically pull a struggling climber off the mountain, obviously, all they can really do is just recommend that the climber turn around and then deal with whatever that climber's choice is. And it might sound like an easy decision to turn around, you know, when you're hearing about it from the comfort of your own home, but you have to remember when someone has invested like, I don't know, $100,000 and taken out a second mortgage on their house and announced to the world that they're going to summit Everest, I mean, how likely are they to accept defeat on their own, especially when there's someone built like Sharia who had established her dream of climbing Everest at just 9 years old and who had never given up on anything in her entire life. What I'm getting at here is that this entire system creates the perfect conditions for people like Sharia, very headstrong, stubborn people, to die, and then very often it blames them, the victims, for ignoring warnings when those warnings came far too late and often from the wrong people. And look, none of this is to absolve Sharia of any responsibility. I think she's equally as responsible as Utmost Adventure Trekking, but just remember, if Utmost Adventure Trekking had refused her as a client, which they probably should have, if regulations prevented total novices from attempting Everest, if traffic management prevented the bottlenecks that had depleted Sharia's oxygen supply, if all of those things hadn't happened, then she would probably still be alive today. You would think that Sharia's death might be a huge wake-up call for the Mount Everest industrial complex, but unfortunately it wasn't. The traffic jams continued, more novice climbers paid their fees and started their summit attempts, more companies took on clients that they probably shouldn't have accepted, and of course, more people died chasing dreams on a mountain that's pretty much become a business instead of a challenge. Oh, and get this. Apparently, Utmost Adventure Trekking still operates to this day, and I have to believe it's now under some new management, or at the very least has some better policies. Look, the truth is that Sharia bought her way onto Mount Everest, and then Everest took everything from her. Her money, her dreams, and then finally her life. And whether that's a story about stubbornness or industry negligence or both, well, that depends on which part of the tragedy you focus on. The customer ignored 4 giant warnings that she should have heeded, and that customer was also failed by an operator that never should have put her on that mountain in the first place. My heart goes out to Sharia, all of her friends, and her family. Please show her some love in the comments. If you're going to criticize her, I get it, but just do so respectfully, please. And also remember, it's much easier to discuss these things and criticize decisions when you're down at sea level like we are versus when you're up at altitude. I had a lot of help on this video from a documentary that you can watch called The Fifth Estate. I will have a link to it in the description. It's not only full of interviews about Sharia's climb, but it also shows real footage from her climb, and you can even hear from Sharia herself before everything went wrong. It's really cool, and so go check it out. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe. If you're a new viewer, I hope I earned your subscription. Again, we're trying to get to 1 million subscribers this year. Listen up, you should never go alone in the White Mountains or in any national forest. And on November 20th, 2022, 19-year-old Emily Sotelo learned that lesson in tragic fashion. At 4:30 in the morning, Emily and her mother pulled into a dark trailhead parking lot. Emily stepped out of the car, she got ready, she said her goodbye to her mother, and then she set out into the dark forest all alone. Now, this was supposed to be a very special hike, but there was a massive problem. You see, Emily wasn't about to take on just some ordinary trail. No, she was solo hiking in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a range notorious for claiming lives, especially in November and especially when you're really far away from help. The White Mountains might not look especially huge or dramatic from a distance.
Wow. Well, you know, I'm watching these not to scare myself, but to remind myself of the dangers of, you know, from other people, from forces of nature, my incompetence, you know, my being rash, you know, yep, those.
And that's actually part of what makes them so dangerous. They have a way of waiting until you're fully committed before showing you what they're actually capable of. Just 30 minutes after starting her hike, Emily sent her mother a text listing what she wanted for lunch afterwards. Some quinoa, some chicken, papaya, coffee, and water. It's such a normal little text message, and I think that's what makes it hit so hard. Because at 5 a.m., this still felt like a completely normal day in the mountains. But as Emily climbed higher and higher, the trail began to change. The trees started to thin, the mountain opened up, and eventually she approached Greenleaf Hut, which is a well-known shelter on the route. In the warmer months, this is the kind of place where a hiker can stop, regroup, and maybe get out of the elements for a bit. However, when Emily got there, the hut was locked and shut for the season. If things were already starting to go wrong by this point in her hike, that hut might have been her last real chance at safety. Later that morning, Emily's mom sent her another simple text message asking how the hike was going. But Emily didn't respond. The silence probably worried her mother a little bit, but Emily was experienced after all. She had hiked these kinds of mountains countless times before. Surely she would be fine. Surely she would text back soon, right? Emily Sotelo grew up in the town of Westford, Massachusetts, which is just about an hour northwest of Boston. Now, by all accounts, she was the type of person who just seemed to succeed at just about everything she did, right? Teachers described her as smart, disciplined, curious, while friends often talked about how kind she was. She had that rare combination of being both extremely motivated and truly compassionate, someone who pushed herself to achieve big goals, but still made time to help the people around her. She attended Vanderbilt University, where she began studying biochemistry and public health, with her long-term goal being to become a doctor. And that totally checks out to me after hearing all about how the people in her life spoke so highly of her. I mean, helping people was just her natural instinct. But somewhere along the way during this journey, Emily discovered something else that she loved as well. She discovered hiking at the age of 17, and she was hooked immediately. And honestly, I know exactly how Emily felt. I grew up in New England as well, and don't let the name of my channel fool you. I actually love hiking. I just want people to do it safely.
This channel name is called Hates Hiking,
which is a big reason why I tell these stories. Oh, and if you appreciate the way that I tell these stories, by the way, if you've watched a few videos now, please consider subscribing and helping us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers this year. I'm not perfect, I do make mistakes sometimes, but I really, really believe in the content that I make, and so if you could help me reach this goal, I would really appreciate it, especially if you like stories told by a non-AI voice. Now, Emily didn't grow up as like a hardcore outdoorsy kid, but once she discovered the mountains of New England, she started to attack her new hobby with serious passion. She just simply wasn't satisfied with doing anything in her life unless she gave it 100% effort. And so when she read about something called the New Hampshire 48 Challenge, she was all in. The idea behind this challenge is pretty simple. There are 48 peaks in the White Mountains of New Hampshire that rise above 4,000 feet, and hikers try to complete every single one of these mountains, checking them off the list as they go. And this sounds like a pretty straightforward challenge, at least on paper, but trust me, it is not easy, and I can tell you that from experience. It took me about 5 years and even a few failed attempts to finally complete my New Hampshire 48. And after hearing about what happened to Emily, I consider myself pretty lucky to have racked up all 48 in one piece. In fact, Emily's story really struck a chord with me because I followed pretty much the exact same trajectory as her when I was in my late teens. I discovered hiking around the same formative age, and one of the first challenges I got obsessed with was the New Hampshire 48. Now, I'm not trying to make this video about me, but I'm just saying, like, this one hits me really hard because I did the exact same challenge at the exact same age in the exact same place.
Well, that puts the story into perspective, though. You know, from a perspective that we can, we kind of have a comparison with, you know, and that would be yours.
Place. The only difference is that I turned out fine, and Emily, well, I'll get there. Emily approached the New Hampshire 48 challenge with the same determination that she brought to everything else in her life. Within just 2 years of starting to hike regularly, she had already climbed 40 of the 48 peaks, which is super impressive, a lot faster than I did it. I mean, that pace would be pretty insane for some of the more experienced hikers I know, especially when you consider how rugged many of those trails are. But Emily was young, athletic, and extremely motivated. She seemed to thrive in the face of the challenge, and she was about to face her biggest challenge yet. Emily decided that she was going to speed run her last 8 peaks before her 20th birthday, and the final stretch of summits was about to bring her through the heart of some of the most uncertain and dangerous terrain that the White Mountains have to offer. Now, the Whites, as we call them, are well known throughout the hiking world, but from a distance, they really don't look especially intimidating. The absolute tallest peak in the White Mountains is only 6,288 feet in elevation, and so when you compare that to the towering peaks in Colorado, for instance, where the tallest mountain is around 14,440 feet, well, the White Mountains almost look easy, but if you spend enough time in these mountains like I have, or if you talk to the search and rescue teams who patrol them, you'll quickly learn that the White Mountains have a way of almost luring you in with their more like low-key disappearance, and it isn't until you're approaching the summit that they finally decide to strike. To be a little more specific, the weather in the White Mountains is notorious for changing without warning, shifting from calm, clear skies to these hurricane-force winds and blinding snow in just moments. And I'm not being dramatic, by the way. Mount Washington, for example, once recorded wind gusts of 231 miles per hour, which for a long time held the world record for the highest wind speed ever measured on Earth. I'm pretty sure it still holds the record for North America, and so I'm telling you, these mountains are no joke. They're dangerous, and yet, despite those things, they're very popular, thanks in part to their proximity to major cities like Boston and New York, and year-round, they draw hikers in search of adventure, but quite often, those trips take a very tragic turn. As Thanksgiving break was approaching, Emily decided that she had a window of opportunity to complete her challenge. If she was able to plan everything out just right, she thought that she would be able to knock out the 8 remaining peaks during that break. And so she mapped out 3 straight days of hiking multiple mountains that would end with a celebratory hike and dinner with her mom on her 20th birthday, November 23rd, 2022. Now, this was a very ambitious plan, maybe even a little aggressive, but Emily had already proven that she could move quickly in the mountains. Finishing the New Hampshire 48 before turning 20 was all that she could think about, and her first day was going to take her across one of the most famously difficult hikes in the entire White Mountains. That would be Franconia Ridge. Franconia Ridge is an exposed ridgeline that connects several peaks, Mount Lafayette, Little Haystack, and Mount Flume, a few others. And on a clear spring or summer day, the ridgeline can be the perfect spot to capture sweeping views across miles of wilderness in pretty much every direction. I've hiked Franconia Ridge at least 4 times that I can remember, and so I'm telling you from experience here, this is the kind of hike that people travel all across the region just to experience. It's unbelievable, but if you're not careful, the priceless view at the top of the ridge might just cost you everything. And I say that because once you reach the top of the ridge, you're completely exposed to the weather. There's no trees to block the wind. There's no shelter from snow or rain. Just this open alpine terrain where conditions can turn brutal in an instant. Now, Emily was well aware of this, obviously. I mean, she had already climbed many challenging mountains in the region, and she had spent plenty of time researching routes and looking at trail reports before her trip. But still, it was late November in the White Mountains, And Mother Nature doesn't care whether you're a high achiever who graduated at the top of your class or whether you dropped out of school. It's always going to do whatever the hell it wants. And it pains me to say this, but Emily was about to find this out the hard way. Now,
what if all this something is unforgivable? Hiding my potential like it's criminal. But I got an alter ego like a whole lot of humans see me for how I really am. But I can do the same. Let's go. No, I don't think I react. Big step, big moves, I don't chase, I attract. Too loud, too fast, homeroom jump back. I ain't here for the rules, I'm here for the
now, there's going to be a very important give back call out at the end of this video, and honestly, it wouldn't be possible for me to do this without the support of Drink Element. Oh, and it also wouldn't be possible for me to hike in the White Mountains without Element either. They are the sponsor of this video, and they're the reason I stay hydrated when I'm in these mountains. And lately, Element Sparkling has been what I've been drinking the most. You see, sometimes I want the electrolytes, but I don't want to stop and like mix a whole drink. I just want to crack open a cold can and keep moving, and that's exactly what this is. It's fizzy, it's salty, it's super refreshing, especially lemonade salt right here. It has 0 sugar as well. Plus, it actually tastes like something you'd want to drink. Not just something you're trying to force down because you need it or it's good for you or whatever, right? It's really a different vibe from the Element packets. I love the Element packets too, but sparkling is just like a different vibe, and so I've just been really into it lately. I love having something that I can throw in the car, crack open at a trailhead, or drink on the drive home when I'm just totally exhausted. It just makes staying on top of hydration way more automatic for me. And this isn't just some random sparkling water pretending to be healthy, by the way. Each 12-ounce can has 500 milligrams of sodium, 100 milligrams of potassium, and 30 milligrams of magnesium. And it's just so refreshing. And so if you want to try it and also get some free Element in the process, go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go to that link and make any purchase. And again, I'd recommend sparkling lemonade salt. And when you do that, you're going to get a free sample pack of Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. And so one more time, that's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click the link at the top of the description. And okay, now back to the story. On Saturday, November 20th, the day before her hike, Emily and her mother, Olivera, stopped to pick up some supplies. Emily planned to pack a couple snacks for her first trek. Some granola bars, some fruits. She was going to bring some water, of course. She also packed a portable battery pack so she could keep her phone charged throughout the day to serve as both her trail map and a flashlight if she needed it. Now, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details of exactly what she packed, but from the research that I did, it seems like she didn't pack super extensively. It feels like the stuff that I'd pack for maybe like a casual little loop in like my local park. But Emily's trip was about to take her a total of 13.7 miles across multiple cold, wintry peaks. She also planned on wearing a pair of thermal underwear, some athletic leggings, a light jacket, and trail running shoes. And I will say, November in the White Mountains is kind of a tough time of year to pack for because it's not like full-on winter yet with like feet of snow, but it's also cold and wintry enough that like your summer gear doesn't really work either. It is kind of tricky. All I can say is that it's clear to me that her clothing and her gear choices were both better suited for more like casual fall hiking conditions, not dangerous alpine winter conditions. But then again, it was November after all. At the lower elevations, that time of year, it can still very much feel like fall and not winter. And so I'm not trying to blame her here. She didn't bring any insulated boots. She didn't bring a heavy winter coat. She didn't have any micro spikes. She didn't pack a ton of extra layers or a hat or any specialized winter gear. Her only real like cold weather equipment was a pair of heated gloves. And again, at the time, that decision probably seemed perfectly reasonable. The weather forecast had only called for temperatures in the low 30-degree Fahrenheit range and maybe just a little bit of snow. However, anyone who has ever chased big goals in the wilderness knows that even if you expect the best possible conditions, you still have to prepare for the absolute worst. What Emily did not realize was that the forecast up at the top of Franconia Ridge told a very different story. Up there, wind gusts were expected to approach 95 miles per hour. And when you combine that with the already freezing temperatures, the resulting wind chill can make it feel more like 0 degrees Fahrenheit which is cold enough to freeze exposed skin very, very quickly. And so unfortunately, despite all of her planning, Emily either didn't notice this critical part of the forecast or she severely underestimated it. I'm not sure which one it was. That evening, Emily reviewed her maps, she finished some schoolwork, and she laid out her gear for the next morning. Her mother could tell how excited she was about this big adventure. I mean, she was going to finish the New Hampshire 48 before she turned 20. She was going to accomplish her goal. As far as her mother was concerned, she had raised a real-life superhero, right? Unfortunately, every superhero has their kryptonite, and neither of them had any idea that Emily was about to step into the biggest battle of her entire life. The next morning started extremely early. Emily set an alarm for 4 a.m. and then started gearing up for the big day. Her mother drove her to the Lafayette Place campground parking lot near Franconia Notch and dropped Emily off by 4:30 a.m. It was still completely dark outside at this time, and the forest surrounding the parking lot was very quiet, except for the faint crunch of snow underneath their feet. Before the two said their goodbyes, they confirmed that Emily's mother would pick Emily up in this exact same spot in 8 hours. Then, Emily turned on the flashlight on her phone and began walking into the woods on a trail called the Old Bridle Path, which would take her to the summit of her first peak of the day, Mount Lafayette. Her mother watched as the small circle of light drifted along the trail for just a moment, getting smaller and smaller as it bounced off into the distance. And by the time it had disappeared into the darkness, Emily's mother was beaming with pride for her ambitious daughter. I mean, how could she not, right? The thing is, though, she had no idea that their goodbye in the parking lot there, well, that would be the last time that she was ever gonna see Emily alive. Just 30 minutes later, around 5 a.m., Emily sent her mother a text from the Old Bridle Path listing what she wanted for a late lunch once she finished. She wanted some quinoa, some chicken, papaya, coffee, and some water. She was clearly already feeling pretty confident about handing this 13-plus mile hike since she was already focused on lunch. Or maybe she was slowly realizing that the granola bars she'd packed weren't going to be that substantial and that she was going to be very hungry when this thing was over. I'm not exactly sure. At first, the hike likely felt pretty normal for Emily. The lower section of the Old Bridle Path winds through dense forest, gradually climbing higher as it follows a series of small waterfalls and rocky streams. I've done this trail a few times. It's very beautiful, and Emily had done plenty of hikes just like this before. Hell, she'd already summited 40 mountains over 4,000 feet just in the state of New Hampshire alone. I mean, she was practically built for this. The steady uphill climb, the quiet forest, the sound of light-packed snow crunching beneath her shoes. I mean, I can practically picture it myself. I mean, probably because I've been there, but even though the weather has been slightly warmer whenever I've been there, I can almost imagine that the winter conditions probably made it feel even more serene and peaceful, even if that peace wasn't going to last for much longer. As she gained elevation, the environment around her quickly began to change. The snow grew deeper, the wind started to pick up a lot more, and eventually the trees started to thin out as she approached the exposed ridgeline near a popular landmark on the trail called Greenleaf Hut. This hut is a well-known and well-used shelter during the warmer months, but when Emily arrived, it was locked up and bolted for the winter. Now, I'm almost certain that she knew the hut was going to be closed. I mean, it's very common for these huts to close off, you know, when it gets colder. But as she stood there, very high on the mountain now, and the wind chill continued to make the temperatures feel colder and colder, I'm sure that Greenleaf Hut would have been a pretty nice place to take a moment and warm up and take a break from the storm that was only just getting started. By 11 a.m., it was like properly snowing and the winds were already roaring across the ridge at incredible speeds. Oh, and the temperature was hovering near 0 degrees. And so without heavy winter clothing, that cold would have started biting into Emily's skin almost immediately. And it's around this time that Emily's mom sent her a text message asking how the hike was going. She was, again, extremely proud of her driven daughter and was getting excited to celebrate her multiple mountain trek with a well-deserved late lunch once Emily finished. Her mother sent this text and then she waited and waited and waited, waiting for a text back, an update of some kind. Maybe if she was lucky, Emily would even send her a summit selfie or something like that. However, there was no response. And that's when Emily's mother's pride started to turn into deep dread. And her fears only grew bigger when eventually she arrived back at the Lafayette Place campground, the parking lot where she was expecting to meet up with her daughter, and she realized that Emily wasn't there. Now, maybe Emily was just running a little bit behind schedule. Her mother knew that the weather probably slowed her down a little bit, and maybe the weather also limited her cell service, and so that would explain why she never got a text back. Just like she had done for a response for the text message, her mother waited and waited for her daughter to come striding down the old bridle path with her trademark smile plastered on her face. But Emily still hadn't arrived by the time the sun started to go down, and that's when her mother knew that something had gone terribly wrong. It was at this time that her mother had to make the phone call that no mother ever wants to make or should have to make. She had to call and report her daughter missing. Search teams began to mobilize very quickly. At the height of the search, almost 50 search and rescue crew members and canine teams jumped into action all across the area to try to find Emily. They even had helicopter crews scanning the forest from up in the sky. And this is the moment where this story starts to sound a lot like one from February of 2015 that I covered just a few months ago, the story of Kate Matrasova. Kate was also an experienced and confident mountaineer, even more experienced than Emily, actually, in terms of big summits. Kate got caught between Mount Madison and Mount Adams in the White Mountains, and that's when everything started to go wrong. If you haven't yet, I do think you should go watch that whole story about Kate, but in the interest of time, I'll just tell you that she ended up getting lost in a blizzard. By the time rescuers found her, she was lying face down in the snow just a few hundred feet off the trail. Her body was essentially frozen where she had fallen. The mountain had just straight up overpowered her, and I couldn't help but compare her story to Emily's because, well, Kate was found just a few hundred yards away from the Madison Spring hut, a very similar hut to Greenleaf.
Di makapag-work dahil masakit ang tiyan? Di matapos-tapos ang deadline kasi may pangangasim? Baka hike.
But of course, in the whiteout conditions and the violent winds, that hut might as well have been miles and miles away, right? Which is another scary similarity to Emily's story. Emily had reached the Greenleaf hut, which could have been a much needed shelter from the wind if it hadn't been locked up for the season. Although, to be clear, they have protocols they need to follow. They can't just leave their huts unlocked all winter. I mean, so I get why they locked it up, but still, it makes you wonder. The biggest difference between Kate's story and Emily's story was the 11 bizarre distress signals sent from Kate's personal locator beacon, which created critical confusion during the rescue. And although the first signal did point rescuers to the correct location, a second faulty device sent these misleading signals that led teams off course and kind of scattered them across the mountain right as conditions were worsening. And somewhere in that chaos, Kate kept fighting, but in the end, the mountain didn't give her a second chance. And I really can't shake all the different ways that these two stories overlap. Two very competent, accomplished women setting out solo in the White Mountains despite the brutal conditions, and they both disappeared near a key alpine shelter too. And the only reason that Kate even had the slightest chance of being rescued was because she had that personal locator beacon. But the only thing that Emily had on her was her cell phone, and the cell phone service way up on Mount Lafayette was spotty at best. And what this means is that unlike Kate, Emily had zero way of calling for help. And by this point, she had been up there missing for 2 whole freezing nights. If she was going to make it down off the mountain, she was going to have to do it all by herself. And so thinking back on Kate's story, a lot of people wondered if Emily was just right off the trail, just like Kate had been. Investigators were forced to consider every possible theory if they were going to have any chance to find her, right? Maybe she had simply lost the trail. I mean, Franconia Ridge in winter conditions can be extremely difficult to navigate. Snow drifts can bury entire sections of the trail, and visibility can disappear when the fog rolls in or the high winds kick up. Normally, hikers can rely on stone cairns to guide them from one peak to the next, the rocks that they stack up above treeline. But in severe weather, those cairns, or is it cairns? I don't know. They're pretty much impossible to find when you can barely see 2 feet in front of you, right? Emily might have lost the trail, And if she was disoriented and facing brutal wind and cold,
Whoa,
one wrong turn could have been the difference between life and death. Investigators also had to consider the possibility that maybe Emily had somehow decided to follow one of the small mountain streams that winds throughout the valley near Old Bridle Path. Authorities did search along Walker Brook and Dry Brook to see if either of them held any answers. I mean, if she had gravitated towards the water, maybe she could have fallen into one of the creeks and then froze. However, after further investigation, neither of those two streams showed any sign that Emily had been there, which meant that the mystery of her disappearance just continued to deepen. But after 2 intense days of crisscrossing the area, authorities made their biggest discovery yet, and it meant that Emily's time might be running out even faster than they had originally thought. The temperature was still in the low single digits Fahrenheit as search and rescue crews headed up Mount Lafayette on the afternoon of Tuesday, November 22nd. The wind was still consistently whipping through the area, and according to James Nealand, a lieutenant from New Hampshire Fish and Game, the conditions had made it extremely difficult for his crews to make any progress at all. I mentioned earlier that crews had searched the 2 streams closest to the Old Bridle Path, but after they found zero trace of Emily in either one of them, they essentially decided to expand the search area beyond the trail itself. Maybe Emily had gone much further off trail than anyone had originally expected. That's what they were thinking. And so one of those expanded search and rescue crews were sent to look around a different stream that was a little north of the initial search area. And this stream was called Lafayette Brook. That crew navigated the extremely harsh weather and trudged through snow that was almost waist deep, which is insane for November. And as they were doing this, one of the members noticed something that stood out in this bright white snow. The mysterious object, or objects, they weren't really sure yet, well, it was laying on the ground right beside the edge of Lafayette Brook. The curious searchers kept pushing a few extra feet through the deep snow, and when they finally arrived at this unknown object, they knew almost immediately that they had found a major clue in this case. It was a backpack. Now, I couldn't tell for sure through any of the reports if the backpack had been found, like, inside the stream itself, or if it had, like, washed up, or if it was found, like, near the stream, fully out of the water. But I did find a quote from James Nealand that said that they had discovered a few familiar items inside the backpack. Granola bars, a banana, and a water bottle that had frozen solid. They obviously assumed that they had found Emily Sotelo's backpack and her other belongings way out there by Lafayette Brook, which was just a little bit north of where they had been searching originally. The crew also noticed a few possible tracks in the snow nearby Emily's belongings, but it had taken them almost 2 hours to travel just 900 feet, crunching over small trees packed with ice and sinking into the snow. The area was proving to be almost impossible for even these well-prepared and well-trained crews to navigate.
All-in-one sa sangkap, all-in-one sa sarap. Magic sarap.
And I can only imagine what kind of a nightmare it would have been for someone like Emily, who definitely didn't have the right kind of gear for this stuff. The searchers desperately wanted to follow these tracks and see where they led, especially after a helicopter above had spotted even more tracks. But at this point, it was starting to get dark and extremely unsafe. And so, unfortunately, the search was called off for the day. I mean, if they were going to have any chance to find and hopefully save Emily, they had to hope against hope that she could survive at least one more night in the White Mountains. Early the next morning, crews came right back to the area where Emily's belongings had been found the day before. 3 different search teams approached from different directions, and I mean, they weren't going to let the treacherous terrain keep them from getting to the bottom of this desperate search once and for all. It already sucked enough, frankly, that they had to call off the search the night before. And I realize that might rub some of you the wrong way, but you have to keep in mind, these rescuers were already putting their lives at risk to try to find and save Emily, and pushing on through the night, spending the night up there on the mountain in the freezing cold, in the darkness, that just would have been reckless. And so I just want to be clear, it's not like they just abandoned the search once it got dark. They really had no choice in terms of safety. But, they were back up there the next morning, and each team member expertly climbed over icy downed trees, pushed through the powder, the snow, and followed the rushing waters of Lafayette Brook. And it was just a few hours later, just after 11 a.m., when one of the teams made the biggest breakthrough in the case yet. That particular team was searching the area around the headwaters of the stream, aka the place where the river begins essentially, and that's where they noticed another mysterious object underneath a nearby tree. And this time it was much bigger than just a backpack. They approached it slowly, and I can only assume that each crew member was probably beginning to realize that their long, dangerous search was over. And sadly, they were not going to get a happy ending. There, they found Emily Sotelo's body right near the headwaters of Lafayette Brook, 3/4 of a mile from the trail. She had not survived her battle with the frigid mountain, but it was clear that she put up one hell of a fight. Emily was lying beneath the trees, curled on her side and dusted with fresh fallen snow. Her jacket was open, one of her gloves was missing, and strangely, one of her shoes was missing as well. These parts of the stories are always hard to read, man. Basically, everyone's worst fears had finally been confirmed true. One of the most intelligent, hardworking people to ever set foot in the White Mountains had suddenly become one of its many, many victims. And so, inevitably, everyone started to ask the next obvious question, which was, why? I mean, how had she gotten so far off the trail? How long had she lasted in the below freezing temperatures? Oh, and where the hell was her missing shoe and her glove? Lieutenant Nealon believes that at some point along the ridge between Greenleaf Huts and the summit of Mount Lafayette, Emily may have decided to turn back around due to the insane weather, and then disoriented and facing brutal wind and cold, she likely made a decision that many lost hikers make. She started heading downhill in search of shelter and to get below the tree line where the conditions would be a little bit better. We don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing she basically abandoned the trail, which continued along the ridgeline for a long time, and decided that she needed to just get the hell off the mountain, essentially, and she kind of just went rogue. That's my interpretation, to be clear. I don't know for sure if that's what happened, but regardless, she did wander onto the northwest side of Mount Lafayette, which is an area with almost no marked trails and extremely rugged terrain. Like, being up there, I can't even imagine going off trail in these conditions. Once she began descending, she eventually took a wrong turn and started to move deeper into the wilderness rather than towards safety. The terrain started to get even steeper. There's like huge boulders around this area. The weather was just getting worse, and the thick forest made it impossible to know where you had been or even where you were going. The deep snow covered rocks and fallen trees, which made every step dangerous and uncertain. Even experienced, well-prepared hikers would struggle pushing through terrain like this. Captain Michael Eastman of New Hampshire Fish and Game had his suspicions on the exact spot where Emily made her deadly wrong turn. He said, quote, "There is a 90-degree dogleg on that trail between the hut and the summit. This is a common area where people get waylaid." And boy, does he have a way with words. However, this wrong turn wasn't the only reason for Emily's tragic fate. At some point during her descent, she lost one of her trail shoes, apparently, and it's unclear exactly how this happened, you know, whether it was yanked off in deep snow or if it came loose during like a stumble or a fall. But regardless, suddenly one of her feet was left with only a sock as protection against the harsh conditions. But even with that serious setback, she continued moving downhill, determined to press on. And that's when authorities believe that she began following the Lafayette Brook as it wound through the valley, possibly using it as like a natural guide.
Kung may nararamdaman ka pa dyan sa gym na yan, komplikado yun.
Jollibee Chicken Joy Sarap Savers.
At some point along this route, Emily appears to have slipped into the icy water, soaking her foot and her lower leg completely. And in freezing temperatures like this, wet clothing is extremely dangerous because it rapidly increases heat loss and significantly accelerates the onset of hypothermia, turning an already dire situation into a straight-up life-threatening one. But still, I mean, she was Emily freaking Sotelo. She was the star student, the superhuman hiker. She clearly didn't even know the meaning of the words "give up." And so even more hours passed as she continued to struggle onward through the deep snow and the thick woods. And every step that she took was draining more and more of her strength and her body heat. Her progress would have been very slow and extremely exhausting. The cold would have been wearing her down as fatigue continued to set in, and as daylight began to fade and darkness crept in, Emily eventually found a small piece of shelter beneath a cluster of evergreen trees. Their low, thick branches created like a natural canopy, offering the slightest protection from the wind and the worst of the elements. And so there, she curled into a tight ball beneath the branches, desperately trying to conserve what little warmth she had left, her body instinctively fighting to hold on as the cold closed in around her. But heartbreakingly, it was in that exact same spot under those trees, less than a mile from the nearest trail, that search crews discovered her body, which had ultimately suffered from advanced hypothermia. And to make matters even more tragic, the day they found her was November 23rd, the day of her 20th birthday. The news obviously devastated her family, her friends, and her classmates at Vanderbilt University, where she had been known as a bright and compassionate student with, again, dreams of becoming a doctor. I have like goosebumps thinking about just how much of my story, when I was her age, when I was in these same mountains, like thinking about how much of my story I can see in Emily. I was just as obsessed with accomplishing all of my hiking goals as fast as possible back then. I never did Franconia Ridge in November, but I did do Mount Moosilauke, another mountain in the area, in November, and similar to Emily, I was very surprised at how brutal the conditions were up high on the mountain. I ended up fine, obviously, but like, man, this story just hits really hard for me. The same drive that made Emily remarkable may also have been part of the reason that she kept pushing deeper and deeper into the mountains when conditions were obviously very dangerous. In the months that followed, Emily's parents decided that they were going to finish what she had started. They made the very brave decision to return to the White Mountains in safer weather and retrace parts of the route that Emily had taken. Eventually, they reached the summit of Mount Lafayette, and while they were at the top, they knelt down beside a cairn, and they carefully placed a small card with a photograph of Emily smiling during a past hike. Beneath the photo was a short message that read, quote, "Your light blazes on, our shooting star." Today, Emily's story continues to circulate among hikers as both a memorial as well as a cautionary tale. And that includes an organization called the Emily M. Sotelo Safety and Persistence Charitable Organization, which was started by her family in her honor. Emily's mission in life was to find a way to help all children get the experience and opportunities that she had as a child, and after volunteering in 2021 at a charter school in New Mexico, she had developed an after-school STEM program that meant a lot to her. Emily kept in touch with all the young boys and girls from the school, and she would frequently write to them about the beauty of nature. The organization's goal is to make the world a better place by promoting safe hiking, offering knowledge and resources, and helping the underprivileged. And so if Emily's story made an impact on you in any way, I seriously encourage you to look into their organization and consider joining me in making a donation to them if you can, even if it's just a few bucks. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I will link them in the description, and I hope that you can show her and her family some love in the comments as well. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, YouTube seems to think you'll like this one next. Do me a favor, if you're ever in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, be sure to stay safe out there. Check the weather constantly, and even if you do that, be prepared for forecasts to change on a dime. We shouldn't be afraid of Mother Nature, but we should always respect her.
Itchy brushes ruining your makeup? Dream of pro-level perfection. Real Techniques brush set with ultra-soft fibers blends flawlessly. Lazada exclusive sale, authentic guarantee.
Meow meow.
Tap to master your look.
Man, his videos are very long for my standards. Maybe we can finish it and we can finish it if I played another one. Another one about
In
Everest.
2016, my friend Tom was climbing Mount Everest when he came across a dead body on the mountain. And that alone isn't unheard of, but when I learned whose body this was and what led to their death, it left me floored. I quickly realized that this is one of the most controversial climbs and deaths in Everest history, and strangely enough, even inside tight-knit Everest circles, people don't talk about it. It's almost like they don't want it remembered. I can't say for certain why this story was buried, but I have a feeling it's because of the cruel, almost ironic way that it ended. Once you hear that, I think you're gonna understand why so few people ever bring it up. Long before she reached the death zone of Everest, Maria Stridham was teaching finance in Melbourne, Australia. Born in South Africa, she was a brilliant lecturer, sharp with numbers, and constantly challenging her students to think critically and logically, right? But the classroom was only half of her life. Outside of it, Maria was an avid outdoorswoman. She didn't take ordinary vacations or quiet weekends. She chased adventure. On every climb, she naturally became the leader, often moving faster than mountaineers with twice her level of experience. Which is why, when she met Robert Grapple, who was an Australian veterinarian who shared the same hunger for exploration and skills as a climber, she knew that she'd found her soulmate. I'm telling you guys, these two together were an absolute power couple, right? They traveled the world, hiking, skiing, climbing, doing everything together. And as they did this, they fell deeper and deeper in love, which might sound like a familiar story to you, but their love was actually quite unique. And I say that because it never really felt like satisfied. Let me explain. There was always another mountain that they hadn't conquered together, leading them to want more and more. And this desire ultimately led them to the 7 Summits Challenge, which is when climbers take on the highest mountain on every continent. And of course, at the top of that list looms Mount Everest. Now, Maria and Robert had another unique thing going for them, because even though they had all of these big plans to do giant, difficult adventures together, there was one thing that they wouldn't do together, or I guess consume together. Maria and Robert were both devout vegans, and not in the casual sense either, where maybe they'd have a bite of someone else's burger or cave for a slice of cheese every now and again. No, veganism guided every part of their lives. Their commitment to the diet was basically as strong as their bond to each other, and they wanted to prove that vegans could do anything, including climbing the 7 summits. Now, I need to put a massive disclaimer here. I am not a vegan, and I'm definitely not an expert in nutrition or biology or anything like that. And so in no way am I going to say that being a vegan makes you a worse or better climber. And for the most part, I know that most vegans or people with, more intense, we're going to say diets, I know that these people know what's going on in their body pretty well, and so I can't reiterate enough to you here. Please don't take this story as an attack on veganism. People of all different diets are welcome to watch my videos and are welcome in my comment section. All I'm saying is that for this particular story, I think it's important to note that the diet aspect of Maria and Robert's life has largely been the center of public discussion, and so we kind of have to talk about it. So Maria and Robert's friends did sometimes question their diets. Some doctors anyways, would warn about the diet's effect on vital nutrients like protein, iron, and B12. And some mountaineers even argued that at extreme altitudes, vegan diets can leave climbers weak and vulnerable. But Maria insisted that their choices didn't limit what they could do. And to be fair, she was backed up by plenty of other doctors and experts and mountaineers who agree with her. I mean, vegans should be able to do just about everything that non-vegans can do, right? Besides, eating meat and animal products. Did that really need to be said? As long as you're taking care of your body, and as long as you know what's happening to your body in the most extreme environments on Earth, you should be okay. But the key word there is should. This belief in themselves and in their vegan diet carried Maria and Robert across the world, from Kilimanjaro to Denali to Aconcagua. But Mount Everest? Well, Everest is a different kind of challenge. One that requires all the preparation and all the commitment and honestly, all of the nutrients that you can get. It's also a challenge that, get this, no vegan had ever accomplished before. And so for Maria and Robert, they weren't just determined to climb Mount Everest and complete the 7 summits. They were determined to break this record, to be the first vegans to ever summit the highest mountain in the world. And while this goal was frankly very inspiring, I hope we can all agree on that, it was also a very dangerous gamble. At the time, the summit rate on Mount Everest was just over 50%, meaning that barely 1 out of every 2 climbers actually made it to the top, which also meant the other half failed, often in brutal, unforgiving ways. For Maria and Robert, chasing history together meant stepping into a climb where the odds were already stacked against them, and the mountain rarely shows mercy to those who fall on the wrong side of that coin. Folks,
become a Shopee VIP member with your first month free. Get daily free shipping, daily 20% off voucher.
Things are about to get, I'm just gonna say it, f***ed up. Excuse my language there, but it's honestly the best way to say it. I don't know how else to say it. And so before we get to this effed up stuff, allow me to lighten the mood for just a second. I think we could all use a smile before the next part of the story. Allow me to tell you about Drink Element. Drink Element is the sponsor of this video, and if you've skipped my Element rambles before this, do not skip this one, because at the link at the top of the description, I have an amazing deal for you, but let me tell you why you should care first. You should care if, number 1, you sweat, which is all of you. So I don't want to see any comments that say I don't sweat, because it's not true. When you sweat, especially when you sweat a lot, you need to replace your electrolytes, and that's where Element comes in. If you don't replace those electrolytes, you're gonna get muscle cramps, you're gonna get fatigued, you're just not gonna feel very good. And Element is the best way to do this because their flavors taste amazing. Citrus salt, have you guys tried this? Once again, if you haven't, you're gonna get a great opportunity to down below, but citrus salt is probably my favorite flavor, but I always go back and forth. Lemonade salt is amazing as well. And so when you click that link at the top of the description and you place an order, I recommend citrus salt once again, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. It's like a variety of their most popular flavors. One more time, click that link, go buy some citrus salt or whatever flavor sounds good, and you're gonna get that sample pack with your order. Okay, that's enough fun. Things are about to get bad. Are you ready? We're gonna flash forward in time to May of 2016. And at this time, it's important to note that Everest was not just as dangerous as it normally was, it was even more so. I'm sure we've all seen photos that illustrate this, but like, Everest was just kind of overcrowded at the time with frankly way too many commercial climbs planned for this season. There was also some very unpredictable weather and lingering threats from recent avalanches and ice falls. But despite these dangers, Maria and Robert were not deterred. When they landed in Kathmandu, they began their preparations for the altitude to come by, drinking as much water as they possibly could, eating as many carbs as possible, and I'm sure they were also getting some meatless protein in there as well, because, a boost of that never hurts before a big climb. They took the short flight from Kathmandu to Lukla, and with snacks and only the usual lightheadedness that comes with elevation, Maria and Robert began their trek to base camp. Not a lot of people understand this about Everest, but by the time you get to Lukla, which is like the small town where you start your journey to base camp, you're already over 9,000 feet above sea level, or over 2,800 meters. And it's not like you get to base camp in just one simple short hike, or even in one day. It's a multi-day brutal journey just to get there. My friend Tom, who also happens to be another YouTuber, by the way, he helped me out a lot with this script. You should check out his channel. It's called Everest Mystery. Tom told me that on those...
I'm gonna switch over to World of Tanks. It's gonna be almost 3 hours.
days where you're climbing to base camp, you really have to be just careful because the wind can get taken out of you from pushing even just a little bit too much, which is insane. But anyways, Robert and Maria eventually did arrive at base camp, which is over 17,000 feet above sea level, or over 500 meters, which really should put in perspective how difficult just the climb to get to base camp is, right? And I'm sure by the time they got there, Robert and Maria were probably a little bit gassed, but that's pretty par for the course for everyone, right? In fact, Robert and Maria actually had spent a lot of time at this very same altitude on their previous climbs. And so they knew not only how to take care of themselves, but also how to take care of each other. And that love and caretaking, along with the sheer will it takes to accomplish this feat, was what was going to get them up the next 10,000 feet or 3,000 meters to the summit of the highest mountain on Earth together. But right here, it's important to note that when you climb Everest, everyone kind of knows the deal. I mean, I already told you that it's close to a 50-50 shot to actually reach the summit, but there's also another statistic that I need to share. There's a risk, a very real risk, that when you go up the mountain, you may not come back down. As of 2025, in the best research that I could find, the number of people that don't come back down is a little bit more than 1%, which might sound small, but you need to know that Everest guides and Sherpas take that percentage very seriously because it does happen from time to time. And the reason I bring this up is because going with someone who loves you more than the world might feel like an added security at first, but that may make what could possibly happen to you up there or your partner so much worse, right? And so flash forward to May 20th, 2016. Maria and Robert had made it all the way up to Camp 4, perched at over 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters. Ahead of them was just the final push to the summit. I mean, they were really close. It was early in the morning and the conditions weren't ideal, but there was enough of a window for them to make that push to summit Mount Everest. Darkness surrounded them. Maria's and Robert's headlamps cut through the snow and ice. Folks, at this elevation, I've never been there, but from talking to Tom and everyone knows that every single step hurts. Every single breath feels like it's gonna be your last. It's a straight up battle to move forward, but you also can't push yourself too hard either. And so you're in this struggle, and all of that combines while the wind is just whipping in your face. Oh, and in Maria and Robert's case, they haven't even been able to eat any beef jerky. But anyways, Maria was actually starting off unusually strong. She was actually leading Robert and moving faster than the rest of the climbers in their group. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but she had this record, this big record in her mind, this idea of being the very first vegan to ever summit Mount Everest. And I'm gonna make some assumptions here, but while I imagine it would feel really good just for herself to break a record, we all, winning something or breaking a record feels good, but I think it was probably even more important to her to break this record because it would just be so validating to the lifestyle that her and Robert had committed to. She could prove all the haters of the vegan diet or even a lot of the doctors and experts wrong. That you could do something like this while eating no meat or animal products. And so she's charging up the mountain, and Robert was just a little bit behind her, but with her every step of the way. In fact, he was actually going to let her be the first one to summit because he knew that this record mattered more to her than to him. But as the hours dragged on and the summit became closer and closer, something started to change.
It was a very good timing.
Uy, Mare! Lunch tayo? Diba, naghahanap ako ng new work? Yeah? I found this great match on Job Street.
Robert was actually the first one to notice, even before the Sherpas and the guides. Maria's pace, which had started out so strong, began to slow down. And at first, Robert didn't say anything, probably because at that altitude, you're just trying to focus on your own breathing and getting up the next step. And so, at first it's whatever, but after a few minutes, Maria's pace became noticeable to the rest of the group. Her breath became shallow and rapid. Her chest rattled with each, inhale, and her body just seemed to start giving out on her, as if she had basically run out of fuel. She whispered, barely audible through her mask, but just enough for her husband to hear, quote, "I don't feel right." And that's probably a line that we've all said before, but you need to remember that at altitude, up in the death zone of Mount Everest, hearing those words is terrifying. That is almost the worst case scenario for a climber in this situation. And it also brings up a lot of hard decisions. And in this moment, Maria and Robert decided to keep pushing on silently as Maria tried to basically mask her suffering. But it wasn't long until her skin started to turn completely pale and her lips became fully blue. Each breath that she took came with this wet, gurgling sound, which was absolutely horrifying. It's hard to even say that, to be honest. The Sherpas were taking note of her condition, but Maria was still trucking on. Her eyes stayed straight ahead of her, but behind her mask. The truth was that they were glassy and unfocused. I mean, it was getting bad. But even still, she could actually see the final pass leading to the summit at this point. She even paused to kind of marvel at it, right? She was so close. And just as she took a confident step towards it, disaster struck, folks. Her knees gave way and she buckled into the snow. And at that moment, Maria's body was suffering severely from several things, as she was lacking blood flow, warmth, and possibly some key nutrients that would have helped her stay upright. But most notably, Maria was lacking oxygen. Again, where she is, the air is so thin. She's at high altitude in the death zone of Mount Everest. She was experiencing the symptoms of something called HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema. This is when fluids fill your lungs, restricting oxygen flow. And when you're that high up in elevation with the air so thin anyways, basically anything else that gets in the way of your breathing puts you in very, very bad shape very, very quickly. And so after she fell, Robert grabbed Maria and he pulled her out of the snow. He supported her weight and tried to keep her upright, because the floor of the mountain was freezing, and adding hypothermia to the mix of this already bad situation was obviously not what needed to happen. Things started to get a little chaotic here. Sherpas were kind of shouting instructions to each other, opening oxygen bottles and just passing them to Maria. As the concerned caretakers kind of stood there, trying to do anything they could for her, the sun started to pass over them, meaning that it was now afternoon. Their window to climb Everest was closing. Time stretched and distorted all around them. Every second felt like an hour. And again, every breath was agony. They tried to push further altogether, but Maria was basically grasping for air at this point, and so once again, they had to stop. And here's one of the hardest parts of all of this. Right at the spot where Maria was now bent over, grasping for air, she could actually make out a vision. Now, of course, this could have been a hallucination, and at first, maybe Maria thought it was one, but soon, the Sherpas saw it too, and eventually, Robert's attention was brought upwards as well. All of them saw the clouds parted in just the right way, at just the right moment, that the peak of Everest seemed to be right within reach. I mean, this was beautiful, and it was right there. Robert and Maria basically had the same thoughts, but neither of them could speak it in this moment. For Robert, the choices and options became agonizingly clear. He could climb up to the summit, leaving Maria with the Sherpas to survive however she could. He could stay with Maria, potentially risking both of their lives, or they could all turn back now. Now, in hindsight, Maria, the professor, would have known that turning back was the only logical choice and certainly the safest. And maybe if she was thinking more clearly, she would have turned back even earlier in the climb. There's probably some of you that have been thinking this for a while now as I've told this story, but I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second. This was their ultimate dream. These climbs were something that they did together. It meant so much to them, not just in terms of pride, but in terms of who they were, right? It was what their love was defined by, which is why it isn't entirely shocking that it wasn't Robert that actually made the final decision here, It was Maria herself. Robert and Maria both felt that Robert could make it to the summit quickly and then return back to her. Maria said that she would be okay to wait for him to return, and Maria basically demanded that her husband go to the summit and leave her behind in this moment. She really did not want to let her difficulties get in the way of her husband's dream and get in the way of breaking this record. She would wait right there on the mountain, and they would celebrate Robert's summiting of Everest together once he returned. Take a second to let that sink in, folks. For Maria, this is her letting go of her dream of being the first vegan atop the mountain, and then encouraging her husband to summit without her and choosing to wait for him to come down instead of returning immediately to camp, which was obviously the safest thing to do.
Name your price, Iha. Here's a blank check.
Lola!
May dalang pagkain ang Lola.
Nagkamali kayo ng pagpunta rito.
Di niyo pwedeng malaman ng secret ingredient na nagpapasarap ng luto mo.
Hala, nasaan na yun? Bakit mo to ginagawa sa akin?
Name your price, Iha. Umalis ka lang sa pamilyang to. Here's a blank check.
Sorry, Ma. Hindi ako susuko sa pamilyang to. Tulungan mo ako, Joaquin! Ang asawa mo!
Ma!
Anak!
Han, anong ginawa mo?
Joaquin, nakita ko yung mama mo sa kusina! Eto, di ba sa'yo to?
Sinungaling! Joaquin, sinong paniniwalaan mo? Yan babaeng yan? O ako, nanay mo?
Anak mo lang si Joaquin, Ma. Hindi mo siya pagmamayari.
And again, it's easy to kind of hyper-analyze these things after the fact, but I don't know if this decision that Maria made was made out of selflessness or out of just straight-up exhaustion. But anyways, I now want you to put yourself in Robert's shoes. I mean, at this point, the last thing he's thinking about is his own life, right? He's asking himself a million questions like, is my wife gonna be okay? Like, what should I do? Do I stay with her? Do I listen to her and go? Am I helping even just being here, or am I in the way? Should I just say, screw it, and climb to the top? I mean, it's so close, it's right there. And every answer to any of these questions just felt like betrayal. But when he heard the words of Maria, the love of his life, reassuring him that it's okay to go up without her, that she'd be fine, honestly, in that scenario, I think that most of us would have done what Robert and Maria ended up doing, even if in hindsight it may not have been the most rational move. Because as much as this was Maria's dream, again, it was Robert's too. And so Robert, just like he had done on countless other adventures where Maria was at the head of the pack, followed his wife's instructions, and he left her behind. That's right, Robert left Maria with a few Sherpas who were working to stabilize her, and he began the final push up towards Everest. Now, this is unofficial, this is me editorializing a little bit, but my guess is that this might have been the fastest push up this last little section of Everest in history, right? Because you can imagine that every single step Robert took up the mountain from this point on, he was thinking about slingshotting right back down to get to his wife. And after what must have felt like hours, but in reality was probably under an hour, Robert did summit Everest. He accomplished that goal. He broke that record. At least he thought he did. But of course, this wasn't like an amazing time for him up there. It probably wasn't as triumphant as it usually is for people who summit. I think he literally went to the top, stood there for a moment, and then went immediately back down to get to his wife. And when he did return to Maria to tell her the good news, well, she didn't have any good news to report herself. At this point, Maria was just not okay at all. She had actually collapsed in the snow. There was no standing her back up, as the Sherpas who tried to do this had their ropes torn in the process. Folks, this is where that thing I was saying about having the ones you love up there with you might not be such a great thing, because now Robert, who had just arguably done the most incredible thing of his entire life, summiting Everest, well, he was now holding his wife while she was slowly dying. Her chest was still rattling with each desperate breath. Robert whispered words of encouragement, trying to keep Maria conscious. He applied oxygen and he monitored every beat of her pulse, but her breath became wetter and wetter. In fact, both of them began to develop frostbite as the evening temperatures set in. Maria's hallucinations took her in and out of consciousness as Robert's sweat began to freeze all around his body. The Sherpas were now worried about not only losing one climber, Maria, but multiple climbers, including Robert. Robert was starting to breathe heavily as he sat there with Maria, panicking and begging for her to hold on to life. The sun started to crest over the mountain. It was going to be dark soon, and spending even a few minutes on the mountainside at night was agonizing. And on top of all of that, Sherpas didn't have any more oxygen cans to give out. They had given all of their resources to Maria. And so if they stayed up there any longer, they were all going to be in trouble, right? But just as the Sherpas thought about pulling Robert away from Maria, which would have been, brutal, one final painful breath rattled through the mountain. And then silence. Laying there in her husband's arms, Maria passed away. She was gone. As was her dream of summiting Everest, obviously. Robert took several minutes to be there with Maria's body. Despite the sky getting darker and darker, he was in total shock, kind of just holding on to Maria's body as tightly as he could. Can you imagine this? Like, this is hard to even say, to be honest. Like, I'm thinking of my girlfriend, like, instead of the couple celebrating the fact that one of them had made it to the peak of Mount Everest, let alone two of them, an incredible achievement, just 30 minutes after he summited, Robert was now holding the lifeless body of his beloved wife. Immediately, Robert was hit with a wave of regret of these what ifs, right? But of course, none of it mattered now. He had to kind of switch his mindset temporarily away from grieving this horrible thing and think about his own life. Think about how he was going to make it down, because, again, he wasn't that far off from death either. The Sherpas had to pull Robert, who was basically catatonic at this moment, away from Maria's body. They slowly guided him down the mountain, and unfortunately, they actually couldn't bring Maria's body down with them because it was just too late in the day. It would have been too much work, too dangerous. It took over a week for Maria's body to be recovered from the mountain. And folks, that's the week that my friend Tom Pollard from the Everest Mystery Channel actually saw several Sherpas working to bring down Maria's body during his own climb to the summit of Mount Everest. In fact, he actually summited Mount Everest just a few days after this tragedy struck. And Tom told me that when he saw the body of Maria and all the Sherpas around it, it wasn't the kind of thing that you would like stop and stare at, right? Tom saw the scene, acknowledged, to himself that it could actually happen to him too, potentially, and then he kept pushing forward, giving himself the best odds to make it up to the summit and back down in one piece. I've never seen a dead body before, and so I don't know how I would react if I was in this position. But if you're gonna do Everest, there's a pretty good chance you're gonna see one.
I've never seen a dead body. Even in a morgue. Or a funeral.
There's still tons of bodies on Everest to this day that haven't been brought back down, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So I guess the best thing to do if you encounter this is to just try and not let it get to you, even if it's literally staring you in the face. Anyway, so as soon as Maria's body was brought down from the mountain, you can imagine that some intense debates flared up about what happened. Again, not very many people talk about this story, but there was a little bit of media coverage, particularly in Australia. And as you can probably imagine, the one thing that a lot of the coverage centered around was the veganism aspect, their diet. Could that have possibly contributed to what happened? So I actually asked Tom about his diet when he summited Everest. I mean, that was my first burning question after all of the vegan stuff that I was reading about, because you're not like packing sandwiches or making bacon at 26,000 feet. And so I wondered what people eat up there and if certain foods affect your body in different ways. Tom said that once you're up there in the death zone, particularly, at the very, very end of the climb, it doesn't really matter what you eat. He ate ramen noodles, for instance, just straight up carbs. And he said that basically anything you can get into your system at that altitude and also keep down at that altitude is a miracle, because you're just focused on climbing. Your body is struggling. You can't really think about food that much. The most important thing is to just get some calories in you and then get out of the death zone as quickly as possible. And as for Maria and Robert's strict, long-standing vegan diets before getting to Everest, well, Tom couldn't really speak to if that affected their climb or not. I mean, he's not a diet expert. And so we're kind of still left with that question. Did Maria's veganism contribute to her weakness at that altitude? Again, I'm not an expert on diet. I'm not even close. I literally ate McDonald's for dinner last night.
Meow,
but
meow.
Through my research, this is the best I could find. Extreme climbers usually need dense calories and high protein nutrition, and having extra reserves of iron and B12 going into something like Everest, it has to be helpful in some way, right? And we all know that getting all of those nutrients is simply more challenging for people on plant-based diets. Although I'm sure someone's going to contradict that in the comments, and so feel free. If you know more about this than me, just do so respectfully, please. That's all I ask. But there's actually something else at play here, because while a lot of people in the media were arguing about veganism, some other quieter people were saying that HAPE, the respiratory issue that Maria was dealing with on the mountain, is something that kills people indiscriminately. Whether you're a meat eater, a vegan, an Olympic athlete, an experienced Everest guide, or a silly YouTuber, the mountain doesn't care about your diet.
Or a VTuber? Oh no.
Or your principles.
Just
It
kidding.
only cares about physics,
I'm going to hell for making that a joke.
oxygen, and the human body's limits. So,
Whopper.
what was it? Well, folks, here is the cruel irony, the twist of fate that answers the question we've all been thinking about. And to my knowledge, no source out there has put these two pieces of information together, but my research has led me to this.
No,
So
sir.
oxygen and the human body. Exactly right. So Maria was aiming to be the very first vegan ever to summit Everest, right? And supposedly, Robert would end up taking that honor, or at least that's what I've told you. Well, Robert was actually the second vegan to ever summit Everest, because the first vegan to summit Everest was actually Kuntal Joyshur, an Indian mountaineer who reached the top of Everest the day before Maria attempted her own climb.
Meow, 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 meow.
Literally. So the record Maria died while chasing, that incredible bar that she and Robert had set for themselves to achieve, to prove to the world that vegans could do anything, had already been done less than 24 hours before they had their chance to touch the summit. I mean, this is just crazy, right? And one has to wonder if knowing that information about the record already being broken would have affected Maria and Robert's decisions on the mountain, if they would have maybe come down before it was too late. It took years for Robert to come to peace with what happened to Maria. He still can't look at pictures of her, partly because of how heartbroken he is, and partly because he still can't quite believe how quickly everything just went wrong. But even though Robert may feel some guilt for what happened that day, me personally, I don't really think that there was much he could have done to help. I mean, maybe the Sherpas could have gotten Maria down the mountain sooner, but that decision would have been going against her own desire to keep pushing, right? And plus, she was keeping her struggles pretty quiet up until the point where she basically couldn't breathe. And also, it's important to note that there was no guarantee that even if Robert had stayed with her or had descended with her instead of going to the summit, there's no guarantee that she still would have survived either. For Maria, I'm pretty sure that having her husband there with her at her last moments brought her at least some comfort and peace. Maybe even her knowing that Robert had successfully reached the summit himself brought her some peace as well. But it's still just so tragic, man. And to me, Maria and Robert's story and all the gaps that we've filled in with this video still doesn't answer maybe the most important question of all. And that's where I need your help. Would you climb Everest with the person you love the most, knowing that there's a 1 in 100 chance that one of you won't come back? Which again is a pretty small chance, but if you just so happen to be the 1 in 100, then obviously do I even need to say it? The consequences are dire. I don't know. Please answer that question in the comments, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories like this, especially if you made it all the way to the end. Help us get to 1 million subscribers. That's our goal. I would really appreciate it. And also be sure to check out Tom's channel, Everest Mystery. Tom is a total badass. He's way more knowledgeable about Everest than I am, and so I will link his channel in the description, and this video would not have been possible without him. He helped us a lot with our research and stuff, and so show him some love in the comments as well. And of course, may Maria rest in peace. Show her some love as well. I always appreciate when you guys are just like so respectful to the victims that I cover in these stories. And so if you enjoyed this video, YouTube seems to think that you'll enjoy this one next, and so give it a click. And folks, I will see all of you in the next video. I appreciate all of you so much.
No, what did this? I don't know. Anyway, that would be the end of the stream. Thank you so much for dropping by, and have a great day or night. Okay, bye bye. Next time, let's listen to more stories. Bye bye.
you